Pen. My notebook there. Where's that trainer? Just trading. Hey, what's up, everybody? How's it going? Let me make sure. Good evening. It's an exciting night tonight. All right, that's trading. Oh, well, I'll figure that out. Good evening. You know, it's crazy. We used to get 300, 400, 500 people, maybe more for these lives. Now we're getting, if we're lucky, 100, sometimes 200. It just goes to show you. I mean, maybe it's my lack of popularity, or maybe it's TikTok, or some both. I don't know. Who knows? But there. Well, yeah. Hey, Jumanji. Yeah, I have a new schedule. For those of you who don't know, my new schedule is Wednesday night, like tonight, 8 to 10 p.m. And then Saturdays, I'm doing 12 p.m. to 4 p.m. Had to cut it back. I just, I was telling people for a while, I had to make this work somehow financially. I just couldn't do it anymore. Had to do some more time for work. So that's what I'm doing. I did it for almost 3 months, about 20 hours a week. And I couldn't do it anymore, unfortunately. I would love to do it. Yeah, somebody says when there's somebody who we have a good argument with from the pro-Zionist, pro-Israel side, it tends to get more people. Speaking of which, so I don't know if anybody knows, we have a special guest tonight. Eddie Liger from Midwestern Marx is going to be here. I'm excited to talk to Eddie because I've been watching his videos forever. Ever since I got on TikTok, he's one of the people I've really admired. And we've been trying to get our schedule straight. Finally, we got it worked out. So I'm excited. Well, that's just because I have something in my throat from eating this little. I have this. I don't know if I told you. I make this banana-based dessert. It's really good. It's like chocolate cherry banana ice cream. It's pretty good. Anyway, so we got some cool topics tonight. We're going to talk about some interesting things that are going on in the news. Some basics about the American system, both politically and economically, and that'll frame the conversation for when Eddie comes on. Eddie's going to probably come on around 8:30ish or so. That I usually go about 25, 30 minutes. You know how it is. By the way, for those of you who are wondering, my dog is fine. People were complaining about the dog. You have to understand, when you're dealing with a dog who's a coonhound, they get locked onto a deer and they go ballistic. They can't stop. So you just got to do something to kind of jar them out of their trance. So no harm done. Anyway, good evening. Yeah, it's a great dessert. For those of you who've never made it, it's real simple. All you have to do is I just take some bananas. Once I've ripened them, I freeze them. And then I take them out, I chop them up into little pieces, throw them in the blender. Take a handful of dark chocolate cherries or whatever fruit you want, and then add like some unsweetened almond milk or whichever one you like, and then blend it. I put in like a half teaspoon of like cocoa powder. So it's low sugar, low fat, high flavor, which is like the best combination for like, I mean, let's say nothing's as good as ice cream, but I mean, it's pretty good. It's pretty damn good. Yeah, it's pretty good. Hello from Bali, Indonesia. Hey, welcome. What time is it there? It's got to be, let me look up the time difference. Instead of asking you, I'll look it up. Time in Bali, Indonesia. What is it, like GMT plus current local time in Bali, Indonesia? 9:06 a.m. Wow. So I guess it's 11 hours ahead of the U.S. I guess, because it's earlier there. The clock goes from Asia back towards the Western world. I guess the international date line, I don't know. I have to check that out on the map. Somebody says they prefer yogurt over ice cream. Yeah, a lot of people like frozen yogurt and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, all that stuff tastes good. I don't know if I told you I eat mostly a vegan diet, not perfect, but I don't eat meat, and I try to keep the stuff like dairy to a minimum, just healthier that way. The older I get, the more my body packs on the pounds. I don't know if you're like that too. I'm 56 now, and it just doesn't my metabolism doesn't burn stuff off the way it used to, and I don't exercise the way I used to either, so got to do it. I've never been to Bali, Indonesia. I would love to go, by the way. So if you ever want to welcome some dumbass American, I would love to go there. The only thing I ever saw was when the tsunamis hit, I think it was 2004, a lot of people in Bali, Indonesia got hit badly. A lot of celebrities that were there barely survived, I think. So yeah, I'd love to go. Yeah, somebody says it impacts your head. Now we understand your logic. That's good. Yeah, a lot of people hate on people who eat a vegan diet. And there's, by the way, being vegan is not just the diet. It's avoiding animal products or trying to minimize suffering for animals. I'm definitely for that. But I'm not perfect. Like, I still have some leather belts from back in the day, and some people that are perfectly vegan, they don't have any of that stuff. They don't go to the circus. They don't even support having pets, quote unquote. I care for a dog and 2 cats, but a lot of people who are strict vegans, they call them companion animals, and they don't even like that because you have to feed them animal-based food, right? And again, I'm more of a naturalist, so I understand in nature there's predator-prey relationships that are real, but I know factory farming is not natural, so I think that's what most people are opposed to. I'm definitely against factory farming. So, hi from New Zealand. Nice to see you, 2:06 p.m. Yeah, I'd love to visit New Zealand too. I know a lot of rich Americans have been buying up property in New Zealand as like their big getaway if the stuff hits the fan. How's life been treating me? Well, first of all, I don't believe that life treats anybody, but I know what you're asking. I have a weird mood undulation. I don't know if it's Gulf War related. I don't remember having this when I was younger. But, my moods go through different shifts, it's never fun when you are in the lower of your sine wave, but that happens here and there. Okay, so let's talk about the new schedule. So for those of you who don't know, my name is Chip Barnes. I was doing live 6 days a week, but now I'm doing them 2 days a week. A lot of people were asking, like, where'd you go? I didn't go anywhere. I just mentioned that if I couldn't make this work financially, I'd have to shift gears. That's what I've done. So I'm on here from Wednesdays, like tonight, from 8 to 10 p.m. And then on Saturdays, I'm doing a program from about 12 p.m. to 4 p.m. And that gives people from the other side of the world a chance to tune in, hopefully when it isn't too late for them. So that's the new schedule. We'll see what happens. I'll do an impromptu one here and there if I feel like it, if there's something going on that I want to talk about. But I just don't want to have that set schedule anymore. I have other work I have to do to make ends meet. So we're doing that. But tonight, if you don't know, if you may have seen the notification, but have a very special guest tonight, Eddie Liger from Midwestern Marx. If you've seen his videos, he does a ton of green screen videos. Great guy, great content. I've always watched his videos. He was one of the first content creators I saw when I first got on TikTok about 4 months ago or so. So I'm looking forward to talking to him. I don't know him well. I know he's a wrestler or a former wrestler. He's got the ears to show for it. And I think he coaches wrestling now. I'm guessing he's from the Midwest, hence his name. He's got a nice new neon sign behind him, which I'm sure he's really happy about. But I want to hear more about his life story. Like, how did he get on social media? Like, he mentions he has a partner, so I want to hear who he works with. And just ask him some general questions. I mean, he obviously knows, he's read a lot about economic systems and political systems, and he has a good understanding. Of course, he's critical of a lot of the same things I am. And if I had my druthers, we'd be living in a much different society where, the means of production and the work would benefit as many people as possible. And no system's perfect, right? I mean, maybe there are parts of capitalism that are going to produce the best efficiencies and value because of the greed and competitiveness. And then there are other benefits of different systems. May have more social support systems, better health care, whatever. Maybe better access to food for more people. Like I said, nothing's perfect. So, but before we get into that, and we're going to have plenty of time to talk with Eddie, so I want to find out more about him as a person, and then more about his journey on social media, and of course the specifics of what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about capitalism. and most importantly, late stage capitalism, which I believe we're in now in the United States especially. And then we're going to talk about political systems. The United States we're a republic, constitutional republic, but we actually have a representative democratic government where we vote for elected officials. Unfortunately, a lot of people get appointed once they're in office. Of course, we vote for president too every 4 years. But unfortunately, a lot of people get appointed and they just stay in government and they end up having a lot of the power that we're seeing played out, especially on foreign policy. And we're going to talk about the pros and cons of other systems, different ways that have happened in the past, why certain systems become more authoritarian, which more socialist systems or communist systems are in existence today, how they operate. To some extent, we can't cover everything in a short night, but I'm sure Eddie knows a lot about it. I know a little bit about it, and hopefully between the two of us, we'll have an interesting discussion. So I look forward to that. However, what I want to talk about first are a couple newsworthy things. So first of all, for those of you, I'm sure you've heard this name before, Julian Assange, his court case for extradition from Great Britain to the United States is potentially being decided tomorrow or the next day. And if you don't know, Julian Assange is somebody who's been under punishment by the Western world, specifically the United States and Great Britain, for having released sensitive government information from the United States, specifically some video and some emails that embarrassed a lot of people, revealed a lot of state secrets, and also showed some things that the U.S. didn't want the world to see, some war crimes that happened during the Iraq War in 2003, 2005, etc. So it wasn't just what happened at Abu Ghraib prison. We know about those pictures, the torture of prisoners, etc. This was a helicopter that engaged a bunch of civilians. The video is called Collateral Murder. And unfortunately, the helicopter, U.S., knowingly engaged civilians and then knowingly shot at an ambulance first responder. Sound familiar? So I don't know what it is about these Western countries like the U.S. and Israel, where they feel like they have license to just commit war crimes and then lecture the rest of the world about morality, right? It's kind of disgusting. So anyway, Julian Assange got that information from Chelsea Manning, who at that time was Bradley Manning, a young soldier, sort of a surveillance person in the intelligence community, who got a hold of the video and passed it along. And other people submitted things anonymously to WikiLeaks, which was the organization that Julian founded. And I think groups like WikiLeaks are great. I think journalism, and whether it exposes governments, good, bad, or in between, I think that keeps them honest, right? Hopefully. And so for that, that gift he gave the world, he's been completely, horrifically punished by the West as an example to be made to warn other journalists, hey, don't go there. Obviously. So they made an example out of him. And he was in the Ecuadorian embassy for 7 years because he was taking asylum. He was in London, and he went to the Ecuadorian embassy to the UK and was there for 7 years, if you can believe that. Imagine staying in one place, never leaving, for 7 years. And then finally a new president came into Ecuador and decided to cooperate with the United States and force him out of the Ecuadorian embassy and into the most maximum security prison in the UK, Belmarsh, which is located in or near London. I'm not sure exactly where, but it's near there. And he's been rotting away in there for the past 5 years. And he didn't look great when he left the Ecuadorian embassy. And I'm sure he's doing even worse now that he's been sitting in I think he's in solitary confinement, which is, I think, cruel. And, I would say the guy's pretty much destroyed. He's been in prison for 12 years, right? Which I think is more than enough punishment for anything he might have done. And Obama, if you don't know, before he left office, he pardoned Chelsea Manning for her role in passing the information on to WikiLeaks. So the person who actually did source the information and release it is free, but the person who published it is behind bars. And it's because Assange is sort of an authority figure to basically tell the U.S., hey, go to hell. And he told a lot of truthful things before he was put behind bars or before he was detained. He would say things like not to take credit, these are some of the people from whom I learn what I say. He would say things like, the purpose of a war is not to win, like in Afghanistan. The purpose is to conduct a lengthy engagement his words were, to wash money from the treasury through the weapons manufacturers. In other words, money launder, like I like to say. Because if you don't know, the money that goes to, quote unquote, goes to Ukraine or goes to Israel, most of it doesn't really go to the country. Some of it in Ukraine is going to pay for their civil servants and their government and some of their programs. But the majority of it goes to weapon systems. And who produces those? Well, the weapons manufacturers. And who owns the shares? Because these companies are publicly traded. Who owns the shares of these large weapons manufacturers? The richest people in the world, the richest funds. And who owns the shares of the funds? Well, the richest people, the top 0.5%, have most of those shares, probably 60 or 70% of all those shares. And so therefore, the money goes to them. So it's a pretty good deal if you can get it. You lobby Congress, you give campaign donations, you pay money to these different super PACs or individuals or both. You end up getting policies that are favorable to your interests, among which, unfortunately, is the defense industry, which involves people dying during war. And I've made one of the first videos I ever made, I think in the first week I was on TikTok, talked about that. That it's really sad there are people in this world who are willing to sacrifice the lives of other people to make money for themselves. Pretty disgusting, right? And unfortunately, there's a certain sociopathy that accompanies people that are at the highest level of accumulating wealth. And unfortunately, they don't seem to care who gets hurt, how they get hurt, or even what gets hurt, whether it be animals or the environment or something like that. They're kind of indifferent, or they can look the other way somehow and get through their day. People say, how can you sleep at night doing that? They seem to sleep just fine, which is really sad. So that's the world we live in right now. And hopefully Eddie and I can address some of that. This global, multinational, quote unquote, free market, free trade system. It sounds great. Who wouldn't want free trade, right? Sounds like, of course, no one wants to have restricted trade, right? Well, this is what happens when you have the different restrictions pulled away. When you don't have systems of tariffs and controls, where you have a World Trade Organization, the WTO, that has the authority to sanction or fine different governments for restricting access to markets, or for putting tariffs in place, or for protecting their own ecological systems. If you pass a law in the U.S. that says you can't mine this particular location, the U.S. can be fined for that restriction. So sovereignty of each nation kind of goes to the wayside, and these unelected bureaucrats that run these big agencies can control the rules of the road as far as commerce and supersede governmental, elected officials, democratically elected officials, from putting in reasonable restrictions that benefit the population. So who gets hurt? Well, ecological systems get exploited, workers get exploited, and of course, the average citizen gets a shittier deal in their lives because these big companies get away with murder, right? So the whole point is somebody saying blah, blah. Well, if you want to come up here and explain this to the audience, or D, come on up. I'll happily take a break, eat some food while you entertain and inform everybody. But if you don't want to come up, then blah, blah right back at you. So anyway, so these are things that are obviously concerning and that are pervasive in our world. And conflict, unfortunately, fits into that, the ability to control and to have military bases, position places, and control resources and control the political systems of other countries to those same ends. This is all part of this big puzzle that makes up this sort of diabolical system, and we, the people, are just pawns in the game of this bigger puzzle. And as workers, which I'm sure Eddie's going to talk about, Eddie Liger, Midwestern Marx, when he comes on in a bit, the workers get shafted, right? Workers are seen as not as human beings or as, people of value, seen as disposable little widgets that fit into something called human resources, right? And with things like artificial intelligence and automation coming in big time over the next, few years onto the next decade, more and more of these disposable workers are going to lose their jobs, and anything that can be supplanted by automation or artificial intelligence or some combination of the two are gone. People who do basic artwork, gone. People who do what's called B-roll for videos, just kind of footage that kind of fills the space between the people talking or the main plot, gone. All sorts of creative things, language. Write an article about XYZ subject. Well, some human being who used to work at a newspaper, online or whatever, that can all be written by artificial intelligence. You don't need the person to write the story. Gone. And what does that do? It decreases your labor cost. And what does that do? It increases profits for the corporation. And it's all towards corporate profits. And listen, it's not bad if you run a business and you provide a lot of value to people. Let's say you come up with something that's like an amazingly creative invention and you market it and sell it to people and they like it and it makes their lives better. Well, that's not necessarily bad, right? Even though it may be corporate. But all too often, what would benefit society, maybe, for example, advanced energy systems. A lot of people surmise that because of all this stuff we're hearing about aliens, that there are these energy systems that basically work much better than the fossil fuels and all the renewables that we have. And therefore, they should be used to benefit the public. But if they were allowed to be used, it would eliminate the need to sell all. And we know the energy industry is huge, right? I mean, look at the people in Saudi Arabia, the United States. These people make a ton of money, right? So again, keeping good things from the public to make more money for corporations. And who owns the corporations? The richest people on the planet, right? So you see a pattern. Everything goes back to supporting and maintaining the establishment circle of money. In the United States, if you haven't noticed this, I'm 56. When I was a kid, we had all sorts of different small businesses at the local level. You'd have a local pizza shop, you'd have a local hair guy, a barber shop, and there's still some of those out there, but way, way less. And what do you have? You have corporate or chain stores, chain restaurants, chain hardware stores, chain everything. And so when you or I or someone else from our society goes out and spends their money, who gets that money? It doesn't stay in the local community, it goes up to Wall Street. And who owns Wall Street? Well, banks and shareholders and all these rich people, right? So there's been this concerted effort over the last, 40 years or so since the Reagan administration to slowly but surely, like a vacuum cleaner, kind of vacuum all the money out of the lower and middle class up to the top. And that now there's really not a middle class. There's not even a lower middle class. It's sort of like you're either rich or you're a serf. And this is getting back to like feudalism. And for those who are going to be lucky enough to even have a job, it's going to be bare minimum, bare bones. Uber's a great example. And I can tell you from experience, I've been through it. I was doing some part-time driving for about a year. And because I was able to kind of game the system and I had a very efficient electric car, I was able to make about $40 or $50 per hour on the gross side and about $30 per hour net, which is good pay. Well, Uber changed their payment policies and they got rid of all this stuff I was able to figure out. And now, if you're lucky, you make about $15 an hour at best. That's net of your costs. So that's a huge change, right? To go from 30 to 15. Now, what happened with Uber's stock? They did this at the end of March, early April of 2023. Their stock has more than doubled since then. And why is that? Because that money that would have gone to the working class went straight up to the investment class. And with outsourcing things to China and Mexico and elsewhere in terms of industrial jobs, that cycle's been repeating itself for a long, long time. So it's every single thing that gets done does not benefit more people. It benefits less and less people. And I think a lot of people are pissed. People are kind of wondering, well, why is all this happening? Is it the Democrats' fault? Is it the Republicans' fault? Well, the answer is neither. They're both just tools of the establishment to grease the skids and make people think that one or the other is to blame. And with people fighting left and right, you see it on TikTok all the time on these lives. I see a lot of this going on, and there's very little of this going on because people don't really understand how to get at that. And I think more and more people are starting to get that with what's happened in this particular conflict. It's woken a lot of people up. I mean, as horrible as it's been, it's woken people up not only to the conflict, but also just kind of opened their minds because they realize now, well, hey, if I didn't really understand this, what else is going on that I didn't understand? And now they're questioning things that they didn't even know to question it before because they really didn't know kind of what was going on. Now people are curious. They're starting to dig. They're listening to people like me and others that are on these different platforms, and they're starting to get an idea of what's really been going on for a long time. Some of us have been lucky or unfortunate enough to know these things for a long time. It wears you down. You're like, it just makes you shake your head. The more you learn, the more you're like, damn, this is not good. I talk about a lot of times what I think are the paths to change this. I think they're very unlikely to take effect, but they are potentially possibilities. But people are going to have to want it. With any change in life, let's face it, change is hard, right? Even for just individual, for anybody to do anything, to break out of our behavior patterns is hard. And especially when it causes financial strain or risk to safety or freedom or both. That's a lot to ask somebody, right? And that's if they even know what's going on. So it's a huge uphill task if things could be changed. They may not be able to be changed. They probably won't be able to be changed. And my best guess is, and we'll talk about this tonight with Eddie as a good segue, my best guess is that the systems that are in place are so over the top and so greedy that they're going to implode under their own greed, as late stage capitalism often does. And this is what happens. There's less profits to be had. They've squeezed every drop out of the lemon they can out of everything else. Now they got to come for the workers and take every last bit they have. And when that's gone, there's nowhere else to get profit. They go elsewhere, and then they leave behind the carnage. So, it's not even, quote unquote, the fault of America. America is a beautiful place in terms of the continent, the people, all the things that go on here are amazing. But the problem is that this gentry, this landed oligarchy, has been rapaciously stripping everything out of society. It's almost like one of those cars, you take it to a shop and they strip it down for parts. That's been us for the last 40 years. And there's not much left now, except for a messed up car. And then they go out and find the next car elsewhere. This is what it is. So I'm not sure how it's going to play out. I have my guesses. My guess is that the United States, for all of its amazing qualities and its great principles and spirit that should lead to prosperity for the greatest number, because it's been so co-opted and stripped of parts, it's going to be a much more difficult place to be, especially with the demise of the dollar, slowly but surely, with the onslaught of these things that are going to displace workers, with this influx of migrants, of military-age males from different countries. It just seems kind of odd. And who knows what else? Who knows if conflict is going to spill over? Who knows what's going to happen? I don't know. And I would much rather lean on, some people are upbeat. And if you start a business and you can make your way into that sort of protected class, you're probably going to be better off than most of us who are not going to make it there. So it's almost like a few get there and most aren't going to. And what's that going to mean? And for people outside the United States, you've probably experienced some of this already, but we have it way better than most people do as far as just our sheer, material wealth. You might argue some social things here are totally screwed up, and you'd be right. But, for the most part, most people still have it pretty good, even though it's getting worse quickly. It's still better than a lot of places. If you go to Central Africa and try to compare the standard of living there versus here, it's a huge difference. But maybe people there are even happier, even though they don't have as much material prosperity, because they're not all caught up in this crazy, frenetic pace of life, and like on the smartphone here. One thing I've realized is I got to spend less time on my smartphone. I don't know if any of you spend a lot of time on your phone. My average screen time was like 14 hours a day. And I'm like, this has got to change. This is just insane. I tried to think about what my life was like 20 years ago versus now in terms of the device. I was never on something like a television for 10 hours a day or whatever it is. But I just heard on a podcast, like the average person checks their phone 350 times a day. 350 times a day. Think about that for a second. So how do we purposely detach ourselves from this madness, right? It's a good question. Dapper, just to let you know, I am expecting Eddie to come on momentarily, so it's not that I want to avoid having you here. I'm not sure how long we're going to talk because I don't know Eddie's schedule. This is very sort of loosey-goosey. So I don't know, Eddie may even be. Eddie, I don't know, if Eddie is here, Eddie, can you please request to come up? I don't know if you do a lot of YouTube or TikTok lives, but there's a little blue and red button towards the lower left. It says guests. The info man, we've been talking about that for the last half an hour. We're talking to a guest by the name of Midwestern Marx. His name is Eddie Liger. He's a very, you know, regular content creator on TikTok, and he's really good. Let me see if Eddie's in the queue here. There he is. All right, Eddie, I'm going to try to do what I can to pull you up as a side by side. Assuming there he is. Hey, Eddie.
Hey, how's it going?
And let me see if I can bring you up. Would you rather stay without your camera on? Oh, there you go.
That's all right. I got it.
All right, let me see if I can pull you up on the broad screen. I've done this once before. Let me go to settings. And oh boy, how does it go here? Let me see if I can do it this way. All right, if I expand you, that makes you big. There's a way to merge these on the same screen. Let me go to guests. And let me go to you. There's a way to do this. Camera. Nope, I just turned off your camera and you're mute. Sorry about that. Here it is, settings up here. Here we go. Panel selected. Let me see if I go to grid. If that does it. There we go. I can't believe I did that. There we go. Hey, Eddie.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I kind of got people all excited. I kind of set the stage for this, but okay. So first of all, just to introduce yourself. So my understanding is, and when I first got on TikTok about 4 months ago, Eddie's one of the first people that I saw on here. So I've been following him ever since. Like first, he was one of my first people I followed, and I've really enjoyed his videos because he does so many different ones. I don't know how he finds the time in the day. I think he has other things he does. But tell us a little bit about how you got started on social media and specifically TikTok.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm a big fan of your content too. Actually, my dad sent it to me. He's really enjoying the videos you posted. So that's how I found out about your stuff and really been enjoying it as well. I think it'll be cool to have two generations of Palestine supporters here to have a little dialogue. But
Yeah.
yeah, I got started during COVID. I was involved in the Bernie Sanders campaign in 2020. And when that ended, everything sort of shut down for COVID. And my buddy Carlos and I started our website, Midwestern Marx. And just as a way to promote the website and get our ideas out there, I started making TikTok videos. It was just kind of something I would do randomly when I thought of something to talk about. And our YouTube channel and other things, other platforms have been successful, but really nothing has blown up like our TikToks have blown up. We've just had a lot of luck going viral, teaching people about Palestine and about socialism and capitalism, and imperialism. So yeah, I've been at it ever since.
That's really cool. And then, so I would imagine you're somewhere in the Midwest. Does that sound right with your name? Is that about right?
Yep, I'm in Iowa.
Okay, very cool. And if you don't know, Iowa is always one of the more competitive college wrestling schools throughout the country. A lot of the greatest wrestlers ever at the collegiate level have come out of Iowa. So you were a wrestler too. And if you were, what weight class were you? And what was your record, Eddie?
I was 165 in college. My record was
I'm just kidding. You don't have to answer that. I'm just kidding.
I was like trying to think of my college record. More wins than losses, so
Did you have to cut weight? And for those who don't know what that means you have to go through this terrible process of losing weight. I have friends in college that wrestled, and man, they would wear these hot suits and they wouldn't drink water for like two. It was horrible to watch what they went through to cut weight. Did you have to cut weight at all?
yeah, I've definitely cut a lot of weight before. Some years more than others.
Hmm.
The lowest weight I made was 158, and when I do that, I'd say I probably have below 5% body fat, and then have to suck out like 10 pounds of water in addition to that, at least. But I don't do that anymore. I went up a weight class, so
Wow. So then, do you coach wrestling now?
yeah, I coach, and then compete at the senior level in Greco-Roman.
Which is grappling, right?
Yeah, it's like it's a different style. It's like the international style. So the kind of wrestling that we do in college is called folk style, and that's exclusive to America. It's only a style that exists in America. But
Mhm.
then if you want to keep going after you graduate college, you have to do freestyle or Greco, which is the international style, and that's what Russia usually kicks everybody's butt at.
Yeah, there's some tough people over there. Khabib, Nurmagomedov, how do you say his name? He was amazing.
Nurmagomedov.
Yeah, he was amazing. He's really good, and he beat Conor McGregor to a pulp, which I loved every moment of. That was beautiful.
Me too.
And I wanted to ask you this. So now I was a kid. I wrestled briefly, like in like a summer camp, and I did okay at first, and then somebody who was way better just absolutely pinned me to the mat. So did you ever get pinned, or no? Did you always do the pinning?
I've been pinned maybe like twice in my career, and that's going all the way back to like kindergarten.
And can you tell
But I've been
people
wrestling my
can you tell people what being pinned means?
yeah, if both of your shoulders are flat on the mat. So yeah, I haven't been pinned a lot of times, but it happens.
Yeah, wrestling is great though. I mean, I would say this, maybe boxing is a close second, but nothing takes more out of you from the deepest part of your lungs and tires you out more and makes you in better shape than wrestling, especially if you go to the third period. Oh my God, man, you want to talk about taking it out of you. Have you been able to stay in excellent shape doing your Greco-Roman or other exercise?
Yeah, it's like now that I'm coaching too, I do like 2 to 4 practices a day, and some of those I'm just coaching, but a lot of them I'm wrestling in. So I mean, I have a decent metabolism too, but with the amount that I work out right now, I could eat about anything I want and not get
You
fat.
got the Michael Phelps. You can eat six pizzas and 14 KFC meals and stuff like that. And then, what age group are you coaching?
I coach a club, which is youth and high school, for kids who want to get like extra work in outside of their high school. They come to club, and that's become really, really popular in the last 10, 20 years. All the good kids are going to these private clubs.
Hmm.
So I have a private club, and then I'm also a volunteer assistant at the local college, the Loris College that I wrestled for.
Do you want to share your age? I'll tell you, I'm 56. I'm way older than you, of course, but I hope I don't have you more than doubled.
I'm 26, so
Oh my God, I am more than double. Well, good for you, Eddie. You're looking good. So I wanted to ask you this question. I'm sure the audience is curious to know this. So you call yourself Midwestern Marx. How did you come into familiarity with Marxism or other forms of political ideology?
it was really during the Bernie campaign because we watched. I mean, we were in Iowa, which was the first state in the primary election in 2020, and there was all this weird stuff that went down. Like when we were, all of our internal polling at the Bernie campaign told us that we should win, that we had more votes than Pete Buttigieg, who was in second place, and we did. By the time they counted all the votes, Bernie had won by every metric, except for state delegates, which is a useless metric. And then the media took that and said Pete won the state delegates, which doesn't mean anything. But so they used that to give Pete a media boost. But anyways, not only was the media attacking Bernie the whole campaign for standing up for healthcare and very, 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 very basic things that other developed countries around the world already have or have had for years. He was just getting lambasted by the media. And then on caucus day in Iowa, when we all went to vote, our internal polling is telling us that we should win, and the voting app crashes. Now, the voting app that they were using to collect the votes was created by the Democratic Party by a company called Shadow, who was a major donor to the Pete Buttigieg campaign. So, very sketchy. What the app crashes and they can't count the votes, and the Pete Buttigieg campaign declares victory. They say
Hmm.
we won Iowa, and the big thing about Iowa is it's the first state. So if you win, you get a big media boost. That's why it's very important because it helps you build momentum. So the
Yeah.
media declared Pete the winner as well after this app shut down, and Pete got the media boost, even though by the time the votes were actually tallied, Bernie had won. So not only that, but then the day before Super Tuesday, when most of the states vote, all of the candidates except for Elizabeth Warren, Bernie, and Joe Biden dropped out of the race. There were like 4 or 5 candidates. They all dropped out and endorsed Joe the day before Super Tuesday. So as close to rigging an election as you can possibly get, yeah, is what the DNC did to Bernie in 2016, 2020. So basically at that point, me and my buddy Carlos, who had worked for the Bernie campaign, were like, this isn't going to work. We're not going to be able to push through common sense political changes through the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is too corrupt. It'll always shut down what we're trying to do. So we were turning to alternatives and started reading Marx. studying Marxism, studying the theory of class struggle and organizing the working class and organizing communities based on class lines rather than on Democrat versus Republican lines, which are really, ultimately used to keep the American working class polarized, keep us fighting rather than working together in our own interests. So, yeah, I felt like a lot of the answers I was looking for were in the Marxist philosophical tradition. Yeah, and I've been trying to read more ever since.
Now, you're a young person. How did you get involved with the Bernie campaign? What did you learn about civics in school, or what motivated you to get involved in the political process?
Yeah, so my dad, who is a fan of your content, showed me he was a teacher in Wisconsin. And in 2011 or 2012, the Republican Koch brothers funded governor Scott Walker
Mm.
busted up the teachers' unions, destroyed the teachers' unions, cut their pay, and said he was doing it all to fix the debt. And then he turned around and gave a multi-billion-dollar subsidy to this giant corporation that had funded his campaign. And today, Wisconsin's debt is something like $26 billion, right? He didn't fix the debt at all. All he did was cut teachers' pay and then use it as a corporate subsidy. So it was really obvious to me what was going on. But I was amazed at how he like turned a lot of the community against my dad. Like the propaganda was anti-teacher. It was the teachers are lazy, the teachers are mooches, the teachers are rich, they're living off of us. We need to cut their pay and bust up their unions. And I remember going to church one Sunday and hearing a person at my church say, well, we need to cut the teachers' pay. They're sleeping under their desks. They're sleeping under their desks at work. That was something they probably had heard on Fox News. And my dad was, a wrestling coach. He was the head high school coach and a teacher my whole life. And he works another job at Coca-Cola driving truck. So he like doesn't sleep. He works all day. He does nothing but work. And I'm listening to these people talk about how the teachers are lazy and they're sleeping under their desks and we need to cut their pay. It's so obvious to me that it was bullshit. Sorry to cuss, but and then I looked at Scott Walker, who's getting all these corporate campaign donations from the Koch brothers. I'm like, this guy's a puppet of corporate America. It's obvious. And then at that time, Bernie was launching his 2016 campaign. I was like, he's a socialist. I don't want anything to do with him. But the more I listen to him talk, the more I'm like, everything he's saying is obvious. Less money on war, less money on guns, and more money towards education, more money towards teachers and healthcare workers, and more money towards American infrastructure, just common sense. So that really is what set me on the path to becoming a full-on socialist and Marxist.
Interesting. So I want to ask the audience really quickly, if you don't mind. We have about 170 people in the audience. Can you all do us a favor? Can you tap on my face? You can smack me around if you want to. That'll put some likes on the video, get some more people in. But even more importantly, if you touch my screen for about a half a second, a list of all your mutual contacts will pop up. If you don't mind inviting some people, I'm going to do it right now, by the way. I can do it myself too. So just take a few seconds and do that. Hopefully we can get some more people to listen to Eddie's good message here. Thanks for doing that, by the way, everybody. I appreciate that. Oh yeah, I have a lot of people to invite. Wow, I can invite like 120 people. Damn, I didn't know that many people. All right, well, it's going to take me a second to do that. So Eddie, really quickly. So in terms of Marxism, that term gets thrown around a lot. Like people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, they say Marxist, Leninist, blah, blah, blah. Can you please educate Marjorie Taylor Greene in the audience? What is Marxism?
Yeah, Marxism is the philosophical system developed by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Um, and it's basically it's a theory of societal development, how societies come to be and how societies change. So for Marx, the hitherto history, or the history of all hitherto existing societies, is the history of class struggle. So what does that mean? Basically, if you look at like the French Revolution, overthrew the feudal monarchies of the past. It overthrew the economic system of feudalism, in which the vast majority of people were peasants and serfs who worked the land under these giant landlords and were ruled over by kings, queens, and the church, by monarchies. Now, during the Enlightenment, you have all these ideas of secularism coming about and these ideas of human equality and this questioning of the idea of the ordained right of kings to rule the land. You that ultimately culminates in a revolution which is led by the peasants and this new emerging class called the bourgeoisie, which is basically merchants and factory owners who, because of the advance of technology and because of the advance of the productive forces, have become the most powerful class in society. So before it was the landlords, the people who own the land, who were the most powerful class. But with the onset of the Industrial Revolution, it becomes the factory owners and the merchants because commodity production accelerates. There's more commodities to be traded. There's more commodities to be made. So slowly the bourgeoisie becomes the dominant class. And through class struggle between the landlords, the bourgeoisie, and the peasants, which culminates in a revolution, the revolution sweeps aside the old productive relations of the past. It sweeps aside feudalism and allows for liberal democracy or capitalism to become the new economic system. So it can be kind of hard for Americans to understand that, so I like to use the Civil War. The Civil War was a class struggle, but well, there were a lot of classes involved, but between the capitalists in the North and the slave owners in the South, as well as the slaves in the South. As well as a lot of working class people in the South, a lot of white working class people, wage laborers in the South, who had to compete with slave labor. So they also wanted to see an end to the institution of slavery, right? For years, they were doing battle. You had people like John Brown, who were anti-slavery and waged basically a guerrilla war against slavery. You had abolitionists arguing that slavery should be done away with. But ultimately, it culminates in a war, what we know as the Civil War. Now, what does the Civil War do? It gets rid of slavery. So slavery is what Marx and Engels would call a mode of production. It's a way of organizing production. Humans and black people in specific in the Confederate South were treated as commodities to be bought and sold and to be owned by other people. What the Civil War does is it wipes away those relations of production and it replaces them with capitalism. Now the people are wage laborers, which is they're no longer owned as slaves, but instead they have to sell their labor to a capitalist in the market in order to survive. And under capitalism, the two main classes are those who own capital, the means of production, and those who don't. So they have to sell their labor to a market. Now, the societies of the past, the modes of production of the past have been done away with due to class struggle. So there's no reason to believe that capitalism won't be the same thing, that class struggle within capitalism won't lead to a new and different and more progressive mode of production in the future. So maybe that's a bit complicated. I know I use the word mode of production in some of the Marxist vocabulary a lot, but I really like to explain it to Americans using the Civil War. Because the Civil War is not often told as the product of class struggle, but that's what it ultimately was.
Thank you for that. That's a good primer. Somebody says, what does it have to do with today? Well, we're going to get to that. So remember, we talk about political systems and economies. They're not the same thing. So you can have a place like China, which has a sort of a communist system politically, but they have more of an open market-based economy, which allows foreign investment and things like that. It's sort of a quasi-mix between state-run and private capital. Whereas in the United States, most of the industrial activity is maintained, the means of production are maintained by private ownership, companies that are either owned privately by individuals, private equity, or sometimes they're publicly traded, which means that the public can own shares in it as well as the management or the original founders. So what does this all have to do with today? So the United States right now and a lot of Western Europe, they're so-called democracies where the public has, at least on paper, some role in how people enter government to enact policy relating to things like the economy and other policies. And then you have the economic system, which is called global multinational free market capitalism, for lack of a better term. Now, not every country taps into that the same way. They may do some form of trade within that system, but domestically they may organize their affairs a little differently. Most capitalists want access to every market they can get into to bring in more profit. That's the goal of a corporation within capitalism. You can argue the pros and cons of that. Obviously, sometimes, as I mentioned earlier tonight, you can have something that benefits humanity and it's organized in a way where private capital, being more efficient with its motivations, can lead to greater innovation and a more pervasive presence in the market with competition. However, the drawback is, like we're seeing now, is that workers, to save money, can be displaced by artificial intelligence, automation, and also just sheerly outsourcing production to other places. And with the inexpensive petroleum to ship goods, it can be cheaper sometimes to produce something elsewhere and then have the product or part of the product shipped back in such a way that it eliminates the ability of the domestic population or the working class to function, and it hurts them economically. So all these variables are flying around like a big popcorn machine in different ways, shapes, and forms. Now, Eddie, let's do this. Instead of focusing on the West, which we just described, let's talk about some other examples that kind of buck the trend and why the West may be seeking to upend those systems. For example, Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua. Can you give us a quick primer on some of those systems and how they differ from Western multinational free market capitalism?
You bet. I've got a Venezuela flag right behind me. That's what I did my undergraduate thesis on, was on Venezuela and how they've been treated by the United States. And because Venezuela is often used as a scapegoat for why socialism never works. People say, look at Venezuela, Venezuelan socialism never works. But if you don't know, the U.S. is engaged in all sorts of economic warfare and sabotage against all three of those countries you just mentioned. All three are revolutionary countries. In Nicaragua, there was a revolution led by the Sandinistas. They overthrew the really neo-colonial Western-backed dictatorship and took power. And then through Western infiltration and regime change efforts, they were taken out of power. But then 6 years later, they won power back via elections, and they're still in power to this day. It's Nicaragua. In Cuba, you had the revolution in 1959 that overthrew the U.S.-backed dictator Fulgencio Batista. And in Venezuela, you have Hugo Chavez taking power in 1998 and declaring Venezuela to be socialist in 2004 after the U.S. tried to oust him in a coup in 2002. So all of these countries are nations, small nations, right under the nose of the United States, who are trying to build an alternative economic system. And they all have different ways of doing it. But what it comes down to is economic planning and getting off of the free market system. So saying, capitalism has not brought healthcare to the rural areas of Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Cuba. And the healthcare gains made in these countries have been some of the most impressive things that they've done. So what they do is the government launches these hospital building campaigns or these campaigns to train up a bunch of doctors. And Cuba has really been the model for this, and they've helped Venezuela and Nicaragua carry out similar programs. But now you have universal healthcare access in these areas where previously, you would often have to walk 2 days to get to the nearest hospital. If you were in one of the rural areas of, say, Cuba near the Escambray in the eastern part of the country, the mountainous part of the country, there was no healthcare there prior to the revolution. And the country was really nothing except for a tobacco and sugar plantation for Western multinational corporations who treated the Cuban people basically like slaves. And what the revolution did was it gave them dignity. It gave them health care. It taught the entire country to read. It increased literacy. So what the U.S. does is it responds to these countries by choking them off economically and trying to orchestrate coups. There was a coup effort in Venezuela in 2019, led by a mercenary outfit, which we now know is connected to the U.S. State Department. There was a color revolution effort in Cuba in 2021, I believe. Similar thing in Nicaragua. And all these countries Cuba's under an embargo, and Nicaragua and Venezuela are under stringent economic sanctions, as well as other forms of sabotage. But really, the way you can think of sanctions is like a siege. The U.S. has Nicaragua, Cuba, and Venezuela surrounded with their military. The U.S. military presence in Colombia, which borders Venezuela, is immense. Their military presence in the Caribbean Sea, which borders Venezuela and Cuba, is immense. And what they do is surround these countries with the military and stop any trade from getting in or out. That's how you enforce an embargo or economic sanctions. In 2022, Iran tried sending 4 oil tankers to Venezuela. The U.S. military stole them, brought them back to Texas, and handed them over to Western oil corporations. So economic warfare is a form of warfare. It's a siege. It's surrounding a country with your military and not letting anything in or out. So that's what the U.S. has done to Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Cuba. And the sanctions have been most effective in Venezuela, where a UN special reporter went there a couple of years ago and said that U.S. economic warfare against Venezuela has decreased their government revenue 99%. So before that, Venezuela had achieved all of these amazing things, built these new schools, hospitals, increased literacy, decreased malnutrition, decreased poverty, massively decreased homelessness, and built all these new homes. And since then, their government revenue has gone down 99% thanks to U.S. sabotage, and you can imagine, what that does to a country's economy. I could go in depth about the sanctions on Venezuela, but anyways, so what the U.S. does basically is chokes off these countries who are trying to build an alternative economic system. It chokes off these socialist countries, and then the propaganda machine says, look, socialism doesn't work. Look, Venezuela's revenue decreased 99%. That's because of socialism. And what I show in my undergraduate thesis and what the recent UN report about Venezuela shows is no, it's not socialism that destroyed their economy. Socialism did a lot of amazing things for their people. It's the U.S. economic warfare, it's the U.S. economic sabotage and the U.S. enforced siege that decreases these countries' revenues and makes it hard for them to survive, makes it so they have to ration goods. And then, the U.S. media points and say, look what socialism did. So it's really quite disgusting what our government and what corporate America does, destroying other countries who try to build an alternative way of life and saying, look, no alternative way of life is possible. Look at how bad country X is.
Yeah, and ultimately, that was great, by the way. Thank you for saying that. Ultimately, the goal of all these everything is a means to an end. So what is the end that the capital class is trying to achieve? They want to get a compliant stooge or leader in place who will then allow the multinational corporations to come in and exploit the resources and the people and the environment of these foreign nations, while the current leadership is trying to use their resources to the benefit of their population, which is pretty insidious. I mean, think about it for a second. Imagine if you're Nicolas Maduro, the successor to Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, and all you're trying to do is to use your oil and your other resources. And by the way, Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world. They just happen to have a thicker, sort of dirtier type of oil off the coast that requires different refining capability. But they have a huge amount of money that's in the ground, and they can't sell enough of it because of the sanctions and the controls that Eddie mentioned. So they have less money with which to help their population. And then, of course, the people in the West go, see, your system doesn't work at all. It would work just fine if these blocks to normal economic trade would be in place, if they weren't in place. So the reason the U.S. and other countries do this is they want to choke off the public. They want to turn the public against the incumbent leader to get rid of them. And that's what they're trying to do in Russia as well. That's why they've been sanctioning Russia. They want Vladimir Putin out because they want to carve Russia up like a Thanksgiving turkey into like these different regions and then come in and do what they were doing under Boris Yeltsin, which is taking all the money and taking advantage of all the workers when they shifted from state-owned resources before 1990 and they were transitioning to privately held companies. It's always the same playbook. If you read John Perkins' Confessions of an Economic Hitman, he talks about the World Bank and the IMF's angle in that process, how they try to use economic entanglements, loans, and then they use what are called structural adjustments when a country can no longer meet its debt service obligations to take resources like the water apparatus or other aspects of their local economy that's state-owned, it now becomes privatized. So the same group of sort of, I call them the big blood-sucking vampires. They come in there and they just want to take more from somebody for them so the local people get less. That's the bottom line of all of this stuff. And you might say, well, gosh, isn't the United States, aren't we the good guys? We're supposed to be the ones for freedom and justice and liberty and all these. Guess what? That's the story. It's almost like the Wizard of Oz. You see the story and then you pull back the curtain and you're like, wait a second. And this is what you find a lot of times with capitalism. It is a voracious, devouring, self-serving, like snowball that can never get smaller. It wants to get bigger and bigger, and it's never enough. And therein lies the problem. So I've heard people say, Eddie, in terms of capitalism, that the United States is in what they call later stage capitalism. Can you tell us what some of the characteristics are of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I refer to myself as a Marxist Leninist because I think that we need the works of Lenin in order to fully understand capitalism today, and the works of like capitalism has evolved a lot since Lenin's day too. But the
Can you
kind of
tell us who? Can you tell us who Lenin was?
yeah, Vladimir Lenin was a Russian revolutionary and Marxist theorist who led the October Revolution in Russia in 1917 that overthrew the Tsarist monarchy and established the USSR, the first socialist country, first workers-led state in history. Um, and he was also a theorist, and on my YouTube channel, I have breakdowns of his major works, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, and State and Revolution. And the reason I think Lenin is necessary is because the version of capitalism that Marx was looking at was not fully developed, or I shouldn't say fully developed because it's always developing, it's always changing. But what happened between Marx writing Capital, his sort of magnum opus in the late 1800s or mid to late 1800s, versus Lenin writing Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism in 1917, is capitalism had reached its monopoly stage, its imperialist stage. So Marx realizes that capitalism tends towards accumulation, the accumulation of more and more and more and more capital, which concentrates capital in fewer and fewer hands at the top. So between Marx's lifetime and Lenin's lifetime, that process has been taking place for many, many years. So capital is fully concentrated in the hands of these monopolies who then merge with the banks into these giant trusts, these giant cartels, which Lenin refers to as finance capital. So finance capital is the merger of the banks and industry. And, you know, if you look at the shareholders who dominate our system today, a lot of them are finance capitalists. A lot of them are involved in industry and involved in the banking system. And a lot of the banks themselves own shares in industry. So all of the centers of economic power in our country and in most modern capitalist countries have been concentrated at the top. So this is what Lenin analyzes in 1917. And he says once the capitalist ruling class, once the finance capitalists have completely controlled the home country, they're going to look for excess surplus, excess profits abroad. Right? So they're already making all this money in the US, but they've monopolized, their profit is starting to stagnate. So they look for super profits overseas. They look to colonize countries in Africa to steal their resources and to use sweatshop labor. So that's why we see capitalists pushing for like free trade deals. They don't want any tariffs because they want to outsource jobs to places like Africa or certain places in Africa where there's no minimum wage. So they can get super cheap labor and then bring those products back to America or bring them wherever and sell them and make more of a profit. So with the accumulation and concentration of capital into fewer and fewer hands, these monopolies become imperialistic. And in the US, we even see there, in the 1960s, there forms the military-industrial complex, or even earlier than that, where you literally have corporations, monopolies, who profit off of war because they make weapons. So then they lobby the government to do more war. So really, it's the policy of our government is determined by multinational corporations who control the politicians and big banks and shareholders, Wall Street shareholders, via lobbying and via campaign donations. And the foreign policy of Joe Biden is the foreign policy of Wall Street. It is the foreign policy of the finance capitalists. So the reason I think Lenin's important is because he adds the analysis of imperialism. So the stage we're in today, you know, Lenin wrote Imperialism in 1917. We've only seen more accumulation, more concentration into fewer and fewer and fewer hands. We've seen the formation of things like the military-industrial complex to the point in America where we don't even really produce a lot anymore. Most of our jobs have been outsourced overseas. The 40,000 people are dying in this country every year because they don't have health care. Meanwhile, our government's sending hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars to Ukraine and Israel rather than investing in helping people here at home. And that is the essence of late stage capitalism. All the wealth and power is concentrated at the top, which not only is bad for the world, because the US is all around the world destabilizing other countries, but it's bad for the working class here too, because our system is decaying, because it's all of our jobs have been outsourced by capitalists seeking profit, and all of our taxes and all of our public resources go into endless wars rather than being invested here at home. And Lenin has a chapter in Imperialism called The Decay of Capitalist Imperialism. I think that's what we're seeing now in our stage of late stage capitalism. And there were a lot of good things that the unions fought for and that the labor movement fought for in the US, but really since Ronald Reagan in the 80s, a lot of those things have been undone in the last 45 years of what we call neoliberalism. So we've got almost complete power and control in the hands of the capitalists, while 80% of the working class is living paycheck to paycheck. And I think that's the essence of late stage capitalism.
No, that's an excellent description. And there's some people in the chat saying, you just described America in 4 minutes. He said, this dude just described America in 4 minutes. So I love that comment. So with where this is all going, I talked earlier before about artificial intelligence and automation. I mean, of course, 15, 20 years ago, you'd walk into like a Target or a Walmart and you'd have to go through a line and a human being would help check you out. And of course, nowadays, it's a lot of times easier and faster to go through the self-service checkout. You can go into a fast food restaurant now and order at a kiosk, which limits the need for workers. Some of these places now, there's no point of sale at all. You literally have to do everything through the kiosk and then swipe your credit card or whatever it may be. What do you think is going to happen to the society as more and more workers lose their jobs and corporate profits are prioritized over people's lives?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's hard to make predictions as to what exactly is going to happen, but I mean, this has been a feature of capitalism forever. The endless search for automation, for capitalists to automate people's jobs away so they don't have to pay the cost of labor. It's cheaper for the capitalists to automate jobs. And this is something that Marx spends hundreds of pages talking about in Capital Volume 1, because it's counterintuitive. Automation should liberate humanity. It should liberate for society from having to do so much hard, unnecessary labor. The advance of the productive forces should liberate us from having to do all these hard, dirty jobs. And it should make less work, less total work for the whole of society. But under capitalism, which only seeks exploitation and surplus, automation does the opposite. It throws people out of the workplace. It throws people into unemployment. So, I mean, that's exactly what AI is going to do. It's going to throw tons of people into unemployment, graphic designers, video editors. I see Hollywood is already trying to replace background extras with AI. And this is just going to make more people discontented with the system. It's going to make more people, it's going to hurt people's economic conditions, their ability to support themselves within the system, the same way automation always does under capitalism. And it's only going to increase discontent with our system, which is already at its highest level that it's been in a while.
Yeah, I think that's the direction we're going in, and that's going to lead to a lot of discontent. So here's a question for you, and this is one we talk about frequently, both in my videos as well as on the lives. Do you think it's possible for there to be some form of revolution in the West and or specifically in the United States to somehow change these dynamics to help better life for the average person in the working class instead of just benefiting this small cadre of capitalists?
Definitely. That's where we've kind of distinguished ourselves from other Marxists. There are a lot of Marxists who just believe in sort of sitting around and waiting for the collapse of the United States, waiting for other countries around the world to have revolutions, and then eventually the US will collapse in on itself. I mean, I think that would be disastrous for the people living here. I don't think that's what anybody wants. And what Marxism is all about is not tearing down your country. It's about to use the Marxist or Hegelian word, sublating it, getting rid of the bad parts and keeping the good parts and building something new. That's what we want to do. And like I said, 80% of the American working class is living paycheck to paycheck. Only 17% of Americans think Congress is doing a good job. Almost everybody knows at this point the wars are based on lies. The wars are nonsense. Iraq was a war for oil, and everybody knows it. I think it's more than possible to politically educate and to organize the American working class. We've just been beat back by McCarthyism and by infiltration of left-wing movements and organizations, the obliteration of the Black Panther Party by the CIA and the FBI and the police in the 60s and 70s. So, and even the fall of the Soviet Union in the 90s was a huge blow to socialism because capitalism got to say, we did it, we won, socialism's over. And I know a lot of American communists, older communists who lost faith during that time in the 90s. They stopped being communists and started just becoming liberals. So that was a blow to the struggle for socialism in America. But the more that late stage capitalism develops, the more you see a need for revolution, the more you see that our conditions are deteriorating more and more and more as we've got this demented president who's just pumping more and more and more money into endless war. It's like, how long can this situation go on? It can't go on forever. Eventually people are going to be fed up. They just need a real political movement that they can get behind, that the working class sees themselves and their own interests in.
Yeah, and I don't know if you watch a lot of lives here on TikTok, but I scroll through quite a bit frequently just to get an idea of what people are talking about. And the thing that I notice a lot is there are a lot of people that have if you vote Republican, you're a moron, you're anti-American, or if you vote for Joe Biden, you're a fool and you should be deported or something like this. There's a lot of this left-right divide that you mentioned earlier, while this capitalist class above just keeps on taking all the money while the kids are fighting, so to speak. What role do you think the quote-unquote normal political process plays? You said you worked on the Bernie Sanders campaign. You realized very quickly what the powerful party structure will do to marginalize a reform-based candidate. Can this be chipped away at or fixed by better candidates? Or is the system itself the problem with all the money and it's going to have to change for there to be change?
Yeah, I've completely lost faith in the two-party system, and that's, like I said, completely from my experience working within the two-party system. I remember in college, I was telling everybody they have to get behind these uncorrupted candidates. They have to get behind AOC and Ilhan Omar and Bernie Sanders, these candidates who are refusing to take corporate money. But, then another event that kind of shook things up for me was when, I don't know if anyone remembers the Force the Vote debacle, but basically people wanted AOC and the progressives to withhold voting for Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House until she would bring up Medicare for All for a vote on the floor. So they were saying these progressives, these socialist candidates who I voted for I voted for Bernie. AOC was in New York, obviously, but I donated money to her campaign. I believed in it. And the reason we pushed them is because we thought they were going to fight for us. They were going to be fighters for the working class on the House floor. But what AOC did and Ilhan Omar and all these other candidates was said, no, we're not going to withhold our vote from Pelosi. Why? Because we need to maintain party unity, is what they said. We need to maintain good relations within the Democratic Party. And for all of us who voted for them because we wanted them to break up the system, it's like, oh my God, your ally, you won't fight for healthcare for the working class because you don't want to be mean to Nancy Pelosi. You want to be friends with Nancy Pelosi, one of the most corrupt politicians in American history. So at that point, I was like, the change that we want to see is not going to come through politicians who promise to be uncorrupted. The more Washington gets their tentacles and their claws in these politicians, the more corrupt they become. Even if they had good ideals from the outset. So I think it's time to organize communities, organize workplaces, and build structures of power outside the Democratic Party. Because what it does is co-ops a lot of our energy. Like, I put so much energy into the Bernie campaign that could have been put elsewhere. And ultimately, it culminated in next to nothing.
Yeah, I see people in the chat say things like, Bernie should still run. there should be term limits or people should rotate in and out. I've thought about this for a long, long time, and I want to see if you agree with this or not. But what it appears to me from the outside looking in, and I'm not registered with either party, by the way, because I think it's futile to vote for either of these two parties. But the way that the money has been so institutionalized now through what are called donations, but are in essence, let's face it, they're like bribes. Legalized bribery has become our system. And we have these super PACs. We have Citizens United, that court case that has created money as free speech. So you can't limit donations. At least not, you can limit it to an individual candidate, but you could donate unlimited money to these third-party political action committees, these super PACs. And they, along with special interest groups like AIPAC, we're seeing that right now, have such an inordinate influence on the candidates. So even like you said, even the most well-minded person can come into Congress all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and they get hammered into submission by the party leadership. They just have even Bernie Sanders, someone who'd been serving for more than a few decades in the Senate, still couldn't do anything to rise through the ranks, and he was pretty much among the establishment, although a little bit reform-minded. What are your thoughts about that, or do you think that can be fixed?
The campaign finance system, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's rooted in capitalism. I mean, the way Marx would break it down is that the ruling economic class of any society is going to also be the dominant political class. Because even if you took away, even if you got rid of, even before Citizens United was passed, corporations still largely controlled the government because they control the news. They're under a socialist system. I think it would be possible to build a government structure with better campaign finance laws and make sure our politicians and the people representing us are actually representing the working class. But unless we get economic change, I don't see any way that we get political change, because the news is still going to be in the hands of 6 companies who control the spread of information. I mean, it's a tough question, but I guess my answer would be, under capitalism, probably not. There's not going to be any reforms that are lasting or that substantial. We need a more revolutionary change. It's maybe not a great answer, but
Now, in terms of awareness, I don't know how many people you speak with about these kind of issues. The people closest to me don't want to hear word one about it. They sort of embrace the current system, the status quo. They watch MSNBC. They believe in the voting system. They believe that the capitalist system is the best for prosperity. And they're not identifying so much so with the changing dynamics of the working class, because they're in a class that's, let's face it, my family is fairly well-to-do, not necessarily in the top 1%, but they're relatively insulated from some of the things that are going to impact the vast swath of society. Do you think that most people are even aware of some of these variables that we're discussing? And if they're not, how do we get them to become more aware and more open-minded?
yeah, it definitely varies. And like you said, there's sometimes people are super enlightened on one issue but not on another, or oftentimes one issue, like what's going on in Palestine right now, will allow people to see what's going on with the system as a whole. So I think more and more people are waking up. When I talk to people who are older than me, it usually is a different thing, though, because a lot of the young people I'm dealing with, including people that I wrestle with who are apolitical, are very open to socialist ideas. They recognize that the government's corrupt. They recognize that the government doesn't work. And if they support any political candidate, it's usually Trump, simply because he's anti-establishment, because of his anti-government, even sometimes anti-war rhetoric. That's what they like about him. So the younger generation is definitely open to new ideas. They haven't been beat over the head with McCarthyism and Red Scare propaganda the same way that other generations have. So I think they're more open to ideas, but of course we should reach out to everybody. If somebody's watching MSNBC every day, it's going to be tough to get through to them. That's going to be about impossible. But you have to meet people where they're at, and if somebody cares about Israel Palestine, use Israel-Palestine to point them to what's wrong with the system. Just explain that Israel's really a neo-colonial outpost of the West, and they support, they protect the interests of Western corporations and Western banks in the Middle East, and launch missiles at the U.S.'s enemies like Syria, and help with regime change efforts in Syria and Libya. You can show how Israel fits into the broader global imperialist or neo-imperialist system. So I think that's the way. Education and being open-minded. I recently did an episode of Middle Ground for the YouTube channel Jubilee, where we talked about communism versus capitalism. They have like 8 million subscribers. It's this big channel, and a comment that got a lot of likes was, it said, "You're the only communist I've ever seen who's not condescending." I'm like, oh, that is terrible. That's a horrible reputation for communists to have. Like, we need to be able to have conversations with people and meet them where they're at, and not immediately get condescending, not immediately get like, oh, you don't understand the ins and outs of American imperialism, you're an idiot. That doesn't do any good. We need to reach out to people. We need to be open-minded. We need to be kind, and we need to have these conversations, but also educate ourselves. Read, so that we know how to explain what's actually going on with the system. Read or watch lectures or listen to podcasts, or however you intake information best. Everybody's different.
Yeah, someone just asked an interesting question, so I'll relay it to the conversation. And I want to talk more about what's going on with Gaza and the West Bank, and we'll tie it back to that. But before we go there, somebody says, "Are you for Putin being communist?" So for those of you who don't know, Russia is different than what was the Soviet Union. So the capital of the Soviet Union was in Russia, the territory that was referred to as Russia, in Moscow. And that's where the central planning and policies came from. But all these independent republics operated when the territories broke free in 1990, when the wall fell, and it was the end of the USSR. Each individual republic got their own sovereignty. And that's when Putin said the collapse of the Soviet Union was one of the worst things in world history, not because he was upset that it broke down. He wasn't even a big fan of the Soviet system, but all the Russian nationals who had left to administer some of these remote republics were kind of left out to dry. And they had families, they had homes, and they had communities. And a lot of the protections they had under the Soviet system, which was a socialist system, was the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR, they didn't have that anymore when the privatization happened. Well, just like labor, we talked about how corporations treat labor, they get a worse condition. The standard of living of most Russian-speaking people who had moved into these different republics dropped by 60% over the next 8 years, from 1990 to 1998 under Yeltsin. That was one of the huge problems which is why Putin came into power as a Russian nationalist. Now, if you don't know this, Russia does not have a communist government and communist system. You can argue it has an authoritarian leadership structure. That's fair to argue. But what Putin has done to the Russian economy is nothing short of a miracle, especially in the face of sanctions. When Tucker Carlson just visited, whether you like Tucker or not, he went to some very simple things. He went to a fast food place, which is a McDonald's knockoff. He went to a grocery store. He went out to dinner, just like what you do on a normal day of your life. And he bought some groceries for a week for a family of 4. Well, that only costs about $400 in the US. It cost $115 in Russia, in their rubles. He went to a dinner, which cost like $50 per person here. It was like $17 for a nice meal. This is the difference between how their country functions and how happy their people seem to be. And there are other TikTokers that have moved to Russia. One of the guys has this big beard. I don't know his name, but he had to leave because of January 6th. And so he moved to Russia, and he's really enjoying his life there. Of course, the cost of living is about half of what it is here, which is pretty amazing. So the capital class is squeezing more and more out of us, especially for healthcare. Most people are kind of held hostage to their healthcare costs. So the standard of living in the US, much like it was for the average Russian speaker, the Russian nationals who had moved to these republics, is slipping quickly because of the desire to increase profits for the capital class. And it's got to come from somewhere. And Wall Street works of growth of profits, not existing profits. So stocks only go up if you anticipate more future profits. And therefore, Wall Street is constantly pushing companies and management to cut costs and increase sales. That's it, regardless of consequence to the environment, to human beings, to conflict. And that's where I want to bring us into Gaza, Palestine, and Israel. So, Eddie, what role does capitalism with respect to the quote defense or armament industry play in international conflict?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna grab a book real quick because I want to recommend people read this book um, on Zionist literature by Ghassan Kanafani, who is a Palestinian liberation fighter who was murdered by Israel with a car bomb because he was such an amazing writer. But what he does is trace the roots of Zionism. And what he realizes is it's got no roots in Judaism. It has nothing to do with Judaism. It has always been pushed by socioeconomic elites as a way to colonize part of the Middle East. It's always been an ideology based on colonization. It's never had anything to do with Judaism. It is a way of manipulating Judaism to justify colonization of the Middle East. And,
Can
the
you,
Zionist...
people in the audience are asking what, a little slower, the author and the name of the book again?
Sorry, Ghassan Kanafani on Zionist literature.
On Zionist Literature is the name of the book.
Yeah.
Thanks,
It's
Eddie.
it's my favorite book I read last year. It really sort of blew my mind. I mean, tracing the roots of Zionism, but it emerged in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and it had all these major big corporate backers. We could go into the ideology of Zionism and what's wrong with it, but basically it's always been an ideology that justifies colonizing Palestine that's backed up by the big moneyed interests. Now, it was a lot of British capitalists who were funding it, and the British state up until around the 1960s, and then in the 1960s the United States takes over. And that's because, like I mentioned a little earlier, Israel protects our geopolitical and our economic interests in the Middle East. This is why Joe Biden famously said, if there wasn't an Israel, we would have to create one. Because the U.S., and more specifically Wall Street, the capitalists who control the U.S., need a neo-colonial outpost to protect their interests in the Middle East. And you have all these weapons manufacturers who are profiting off of endless war. They're making money off of keeping the war going in Ukraine. And we know that Boris Johnson was sent by NATO to break up a peace deal in Ukraine. Zelensky and Putin were going to agree to a peace deal. Boris Johnson went and broke it up because the U.S. is profiting off that war, and they want to continue to use Ukraine as a pawn to attack Russia. And then we have Joe Biden, or the Biden administration, vetoing a ceasefire at the UN for Gaza for the third time since the horrific bombing campaign started. Why? Because for one of the reasons is the military-industrial complex is making money off of the fighting. The more fighting there is, the more weapons they can sell. And Israel actually tests a lot of weapons for the military-industrial complex. So if you follow the money, you see that everything the American ruling class supports, they support because it's in their material interest to do so. It's in the interest of their bottom line and their profits. And that's been true of Zionism and the Zionist entity since its inception.
So you mentioned the weapons and the money. So Julian Assange, we talked about him before you came on today. His appeal to try to avoid extradition to the United States is going to, in the coming days, he'll find out what the future is going to lie for him. Obviously, he has a 170-year prison sentence awaiting him if he's convicted in the U.S. of espionage, which seems crazy given that he's an Australian national, that he would violate U.S. espionage laws. But putting that aside for a second, Assange said that the purpose of conflict is not to win. The purpose of these conflicts is to keep it going, to wash money out of the tax bases basically from the treasuries of these different sovereign nations into the hands of these weapons manufacturers and arms industry, participants. Do you think that was accurate? And do you think we're seeing that as a part of this conflict?
100%. Yeah, I think that's exactly. I mean, there are other reasons too. When it comes to vetoing the ceasefire, I can't see any reason the U.S. would want to do that besides making money for the military-industrial complex or maybe pressure from AIPAC. I don't know, but when it comes to Ukraine, I think it's twofold. I think they want to keep selling weapons. I mean, they're making a killing off of Ukraine now. I mean, 17 billion extra dollars are going to Israel in addition to the 3.8 billion we give them every year. But the newest spending bill, 17 billion to Israel and 60 billion to Ukraine, which is like just massive. And that's I don't know how many um, packages of aid we've sent them now, but it's just billions and billions and billions of dollars. And that money is taken by the Ukrainians and used to buy weapons from who? Boeing, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, who are Western weapons manufacturers that make up what we call the military industrial complex. So if the war ends, that's billions of dollars that the military industrial complex isn't getting. Now, the U.S. and NATO also has a political interest, a strategic interest, which is motivated by economic interests to destabilize Russia, to take Putin out of power and repeal the economic miracle that you explained that Putin's brought about in Russia since the collapse of the Soviet Union. They want Russia to be like it was in the 90s, where they just have freedom to plunder their resources. But so that's part of the reason too. But a major reason is the profits of the military industrial complex.
Now, getting back to the you mentioned Zionism and the fact that it was more of a political rather than a religious based movement, and obviously had aims on colonizing somewhere. We heard of things like Africa and South America, but they eventually decided on historic Palestine, and it was by lobbying and using the Brits to get the authority to do that, and then of course through the UN and the US backing. But in terms of what's moving forward, you mentioned, why would the US not avoid vetoing the ceasefire? Why wouldn't they support a ceasefire? And a lot of people question, this is the question a lot of people ask. I wanted to get your take on it, Eddie. A lot of people think that there's an inside relationship between people who support Zionism and Israel and US policy. I mean, former Congressman James Traficant, if you remember him, he was from Ohio, and he was accused of bribery and then served some time in prison. But he felt that it was the Israel lobby that had set him up and had put him in jail, and he has since died under unusual circumstances. I'm not making any connection. I'm just pointing that out to the audience. But his words, he had an interview with Greta Van Susteren of Fox News. And what he said was, Greta, I have to tell you, the Israel lobby runs this place. They own and control this place completely. So his take is that there was an undue influence. I think the puzzle pieces could lead someone to conclude that. What do you think that influence is? How pervasive is it, or is that a bunch of bunk?
No, I agree. That probably is what it is. It's the influence of AIPAC, even other organizations in the U.S. that are really arms of the Israeli state, like the Anti-Defamation League and others, and they exert a huge influence in the U.S. Now, I've heard people say that Israel completely owns the U.S., they control the U.S., and that's, funny to say, but it's probably an exaggeration, right? The U.S. is controlled by finance capital, as I said, but part of that finance capital is corporations that fund AIPAC or groups that fund AIPAC, the Israeli lobby, which has an outsized influence in the U.S., even compared to other lobbies, even compared to other corporations. They have incredible influence. So I imagine they're working hard on preventing a ceasefire or lobbying the U.S. to veto a ceasefire. So that makes perfect sense that would be the reason.
Now, I do want to do this for the audience. I want to take a couple seconds here and do a quick informal poll. James Traficant was the name of the congressman. He's unfortunately deceased. But for those of you, I want to ask a quick question to the audience. So some people haven't seen Eddie before. Some people may not have seen me before. And some people may not have seen either of us before. So if you haven't seen me before, but you've seen Eddie, can you please type the number 1? If you've seen me, but you've never seen Eddie, can you type 2? And if you know both of us, you can either not reply or you can type in 3. I'm just curious, because a lot of people are probably here because of Eddie. And I wanted to give people a quick idea of who we are. So it's midway through our talk, or a little bit towards the end. I want to let people know who we are and what we are. Okay, so really quickly, for those of you who never watched me before, my name is Chip Barnes. I've been a content creator on TikTok for about 4 months. I'm a former Army officer. I was in the first Persian Gulf War on the front lines in a tank unit in 1990, 1991. Thank gosh, a lot of everybody in my unit survived, of course, including myself. Got out when I was getting ready to go into the Army. I learned about the Israel-Palestine issue because one of my classmates in my political science class, as a part of her senior thesis, had to give a talk about her paper, which was on the first Intifada, which was a big uprising of the Palestinian people in 1987. I graduated in 1989. So I didn't know what a West Bank was. I didn't know what a Gaza. I was a 20-year-old kid. I mean, most people 20 years old are doing all sorts of 20-year-old stuff, right? Not paying attention to international politics. But once I learned about it, I was so enamored by it, so upset about the things I never was told. I thought Israel was our friend, that it was a homeland for Jewish people to be safe from being marginalized, that there were all these crazy, Muslims and Arabs that all they wanted to do was attack and unalive Jewish people, and that we were supporting them because they were under assault by these crazy people. That's what I was told. And then when I came to find out about the repression and the way people were mistreated before, during, and after the Nakba, I didn't know what the Nakba was. I didn't know there was a Nakba. I didn't understand the refugee status of people. I didn't understand the military occupation. I didn't understand what happened in terms of the settlements in Gaza, which obviously stayed in place until 2005. This was all new to me, and I thought, well, this is really unfair to these people. Why'd they have to lose their homes, first and foremost? Secondly, why are they having to live as refugees under the military occupation of another country? Why are they being mistreated so badly? What did they do wrong? That was my question. So I've followed it sort of closely ever since. And it's something I've been passionate about. I got on TikTok 2 days after what happened on October 7th. So I've been able to speak to that with a little more knowledge than the average American, thankfully. And it's been a good experience. So that's my thing. My whole take on this is I try to have guests when I can, but normally when I do my lives, I have panels. So if you're not following me, please do. I go live every Wednesday night, like tonight, from 8 to 10 p.m. And then every Saturday from 12 noon to 4 p.m. All times are Eastern. So I'd love to have you come on as a guest sometime if you want to speak your truth, whether you're pro-Palestine, whether you're pro-Israel. Welcome. I try to be fair, polite, respectful, give people their time to make their point without interrupting them, and then have a civil discourse, which I think is what we need so badly. Not talk past each other, but really listen, hopefully learn something from the other person, and then have a civil exchange of ideas. And we may disagree. That's okay. But at least we do it in a way that's respectable. So I'm going to turn the mic over to Eddie. Eddie's Midwestern Marx, one of my favorite content creators on TikTok. And if it wasn't for green screen, I don't know what Eddie would do.
Definitely. I don't even know. Sometimes I'll make like YouTube shorts and it doesn't have the green screen feature. And I'm like, I'm lost. I'm lost without my green screen. But yeah, I do. Midwestern Marx, that's our name on everything, on X, on Instagram. And my first TikTok account, some people might not know this, had 375,000 followers that got banned, permanently banned. Our next one was over 200,000 that got banned. And that's happened 7 times now. So this is my 7th account. I don't know, who knows how many followers I'd have if they didn't ban me, but so follow me on TikTok. I really appreciate that, but also make sure you follow me on at least one other platform because it's only a matter of time before we get banned on here.
Yeah, great point. Just to share my history, which is very brief. Eddie's been on a lot longer than I have, but in my brief time on TikTok, I was on for 2 weeks, had no clue what I was doing. I was just talking about stuff. I was brand new on social media. And I had about 64,000 followers. And same thing happened to my account. I looked at my phone one morning. It looked like I'd never created an account, just gone. No warning, just gone. And so I started over and went for another 2 weeks. Same exact thing, about the same number of people, gone. And then the third account, I was on for 2 days, gone. And then the fourth account was 2 hours. So I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm never going to be on TikTok again. That sucks. And then a day later, this account right here came back up. I thought someone was like messing with me. I thought they're like, oh, these guys are really messing with me. They're going to pull it, but they haven't pulled it. So I've been really careful with what I say, and I appreciate everybody being good in the comments. So Eddie, in terms of your journey, what have you found out about being on social media that you like, and what are some of the things you maybe don't like as much about it?
It is definitely a powerful tool for reaching people. Like I've had this conversation with an older Marxist told me the other day who helps us with our website. I love the guy. He's a former professor. But he was like, Marxism's not about posting on social media. It's about going to the mines and talking to like the coal workers. And I'm like, well, nowadays the coal workers are on TikTok. The working class is on social media, so why not use it as a tool to reach them? Now that needs to translate into something offline, too. But it does. I mean, when you're educating people, when you're teaching them, then they can go and teach their family and friends, and it kind of builds exponentially like that. And um, so I think it's a powerful tool, um, but it's also there's more censorship than there has been in a while on the internet, and that's only going to continue. The Silicon Valley oligarchs do not like what we're doing. TikTok, the first time we got banned, it was when the app was taken over by Project Texas, or a company called Oracle in Texas, which is the CIA in all but name. So for those who don't know, the US government said we're going to ban TikTok unless they hand over their US servers to a US company. So they gave it to this company called Oracle based in Texas, who proceeded to hire a bunch of national security agents, NATO operatives, former CIA people, and they quickly banned 300,000 accounts. And ever since, TikTok has not been as friendly towards free speech as it once was. Now, you have Elon Musk promising free speech on X, but recently some pro-Palestine accounts have been banned, and as Elon is visiting Israel and visiting Netanyahu, so it's like, how long is that actually going to last as a free speech platform? Who knows? So Silicon Valley censorship, or ruling class censorship, is always going to be a thing on social media, but I do think it's a really powerful tool in the modern age, and that's a really Marxist idea that as the means of production and the means of communication evolve, we'll have new ways to spread education with people, spread revolutionary education, and hopefully the ruling class won't be able to keep up with it, but we know they'll try.
Yeah, one of the first videos I made once I got on TikTok was about the media. And it said, this is the big change that I've seen because I've been watching this sort of, from a distance for about 34 years. And one of the challenges the Palestinians have had is that very few people have been advocating for them because most people just don't know. Like I was when I was 20, I had no clue. And there's a reason I had no clue. And that's because we get a very one-sided presentation of this issue through our media, which was even further consolidated when I was younger. We had 3 channels. There was no other form. It was like ABC, NBC, CBS. That was it. And so as long as the editorial message was similar, that's all you got. Now, the one big change with this conflict that has changed the number of eyeballs that are on it, but also the way that we've been able to interpret information through our eyes. I did a video called, Do You Believe the Media or Do You Believe Your Own Two Eyes? And people have been seeing images, very emotionally jarring images, and learning the same things that I learned, like what is a Gaza Strip? What's the West Bank? Why are these people walled in? Like what's going on here? Why are we seeing buildings coming down, saying that there's supposed to be some bad guy underneath that are in it? But meanwhile, all we see are women and children being destroyed, some cases innocent men, but most of the time women and children. What did they do? How can they be the bad guys? Of course, we hear from Israel that they're using precision strikes and they go out of their way to avoid civilian casualties. That may sound great, and maybe it convinces their population and those who support Israel, but the average person's like, no, I'm not buying this crap. You guys are obviously going after civilians. I just watched a report tonight before I came on live that what the Israeli commands have asked their soldiers to stop putting up TikToks bragging about destroying shit. They would literally prepare and blow up a school, a hospital, a mosque, whatever has been abandoned, they would just blow it up, or even residential properties that hadn't been completely. And they'd be standing behind with a video saying and cheering as they did this. And their command structure has had to publicly say, stop doing this crap, because these are war crimes. I think it's amazing with social media. It's been very revealing to people what the Israelis do versus what the Israelis say publicly. What do you think about that, Eddie?
100%. And my mom grew up in an extremely evangelical Christian family that told her, you stand by Israel no matter what. You know, it's part of this end times prophecy with that evangelical Christians believe in. You always stand with Israel, but how can she, as a mother, stand with Israel when she's seeing videos of parents holding their, unalive little children and their babies in their hands? Like, that's heartbreaking, and it's what we've seen for the past 130 days, just nonstop. These videos and pictures, and it's made an impact on people like that who have kind of ignored the conflict for a while and just said, I support Israel because that's what I've been told to do. But now they see this with their own eyes and say, okay, I can't support this anymore. I can't support this just because, I've been told that these are God's chosen people. If they're God's chosen people, why have they taken the lives of 10,000 children in the last 130 days? And you've seen that even with Candace Owens is like pro-Palestine now because she had a conversation with Norman Finkelstein, and she's an expecting mother, and Norman Finkelstein appealed to her on that ground. He's like, you're going to be a mother. What if your child was taken from you by Israel?
Who is Norman Finkelstein, for those that don't know Norman?
He is an amazing author. He's a Jewish author. His parents survived the Holocaust, and every member of his mother and father's family, besides his parents, were exterminated in the Holocaust. So he's an incredible scholar who's written about the Israel-Palestine conflict. And what we know is that Zionists love to call their critics anti-Semitic, and that's really difficult to do with Finkelstein because his parents literally survived the Holocaust, and he's Jewish. So people, they still do it. They still call him anti-Semitic, but it's hard to make that case. But yeah, he got Candace to support Palestine, and it's because like even someone who's been a propagandist for the ruling class as a job for a long time, like Candace, can't deny what she's seeing with her own eyes and how horrific it is. It takes a special kind of evil like Ben Shapiro to cheer on what the Israelis are doing. But yeah, and I just wanted to mention too, because you mentioned all the videos of Israeli soldiers celebrating their war crimes. There's a guy on here who deserves more followers. His name's like B Fendi at BFENDY. And what he does is he goes on Omegle, like a video chat site, and he talks to people in Israel, and he finds people on the IDF, who are in the IDF, and he tricks them into thinking he's pro-Israel, and he gets them to say the most insane things. He gets them to say horrible, violent things about Palestinians, and then he'll go, yeah, actually, I'm from Gaza, and I'm uploading this on TikTok. But so it's pretty comical as well as revealing.
Yeah, that's pretty clever. So you mentioned Ben Shapiro. So a lot of people probably know who Ben Shapiro is. He has a big following. But if you don't know who Ben Shapiro is, he's one of the co-founders of a sort of online media presence called the Daily Wire. And I would say Ben's sort of a religious conservative. And before the conflict, he basically went out to college campuses and tried to talk down people who are trying to talk about gender issues and other sorts of social issues. He was sort of this conservative guy that talks about Judeo-Christian values. He wears a yarmulke in public, so I think he practices Orthodox Judaism, and he's a family guy, but very conservative. So when the war began, Ben, of course, showed some colors related to being a Zionist, and that he was very much pro-Israel, with almost an eerie inability to even see it from any other point of view. It's almost as if his identity and his whole being is tied with supporting Israel, and they're inextricable. And he ties Zionism with Israel and being Jewish. And so therefore, any criticism of Israel or Zionism is anti-Semitic. Now, if you're Jewish and you work with Jewish Voices for Peace, which is an anti-Israel, against the occupation, pretty well-spoken group of Jewish people, they're called self-hating Jews because they don't support the political ideologies of those who support Zionism and Israel. So I'm going to talk about Ben in just a second and the relationship of what happened with Candace Owens, who also works as a member of the Daily Wire. What happened with Ben? Hold that thought. So Eddie, if the people in the audience want to support you, your work specifically, please tell them ways to contact you off of TikTok. And then if they want to support you, how do they do that?
Yes, on X, we are at Midwestern Marx and at I have my personal account that I'm very active on at Liger Smith. That's X, formerly Twitter.
Can
Um,
you say that? Can you say your name a little slower so people can
so
make a note of it?
yes, I'll type it in the chat to Edby. So it's E. Here, let me type it.
Like
E
your middle
D.
initial is B as in boy, right? So it's Ed, B as in
Yes,
boy, and Liger is Liger. Is that correct?
yes,
So it's
yes.
Ed B Liger on Twitter.
Yes, that's my Twitter account where I'm super active. Midwestern Marx on Instagram, and YouTube is actually probably where I'm the most active outside of, well, Twitter maybe, but I don't know.
Oh,
YouTube.
It's Ed BIE, Ed BIE Liger
Yes, that's
Smith.
my Twitter. Yeah, that's not my actual name, but that's my Twitter username.
Okay, maybe screenshot that, everybody, if you don't want to write it down. That'd be
Yeah,
cool.
that's
And then how do they, if they want to support your work, you make a lot of great videos. You seem like you're always putting out videos. I don't know how you do it. If they want to fund your work, how would they give you a donation?
patreon.com/Midwestern Marks. It's the best way to do so. We just got demonetized off YouTube. I'm hoping to get that reversed, but I've also been demonetized on TikTok. I got remonetized, but
Hmm.
basically the people who own the social media companies can pull that funding at any time. So what we really rely on is our Patreon supporters. And if you join our Patreon, if you're a $1 supporter, you get access to our Discord server where you can ask me questions and communicate with me. You get a bunch of exclusive content on our Patreon, videos that I make that only go on there. And if you're a $10 supporter, you get a copy of my buddy Carlos's new book, The Purity Fetish and the Crisis of Western Marxism.
Hmm.
And he's a philosopher who runs the institute with me. So yeah.
Okay, and real quickly, for those of you, if you want to support now, please support Eddie. I'm telling you, he's the kind of person you want on your side. We need voices like Eddie to talk about not only Israel Palestine, but advocate for the working class and to try to find a way to push back against this uncontrollable monstrosity, which has become the U.S. government controlled by this multinational cadre of what I call the sociopathic serial accumulator class. And I think you'll agree with that, Eddie. That describes them pretty well. Now, if you like the lives tonight, I hope you do. Please follow both me and Eddie. It's real simple to do. Just tap on our box and then tap on the plus sign next to our names. And then I want to let people know that I do my lives every Wednesday night, like tonight, from 8 p.m. Eastern time till about 10 p.m. I'll go a little later tonight if Eddie can do it. I don't want to make any assumptions, but we'll see. And then on every Saturday, I go from 12 p.m. noon to 4 p.m. So it's kind of fun. My normal format, though, I mean, it's wonderful to have Eddie as a guest. It's been incredible to speak with him. I'm loving every minute of it. I think the audience is. I do also have panels that come up and talk about issues like Israel Palestine and other issues we like to talk about. I get into a whole variety of stuff. I'm a pretty strange but multifaceted thinker. But if you want to support my work, I have a link tree in my bio. It just says Linktree Chip Barnes. So that's what I use. I do have a website, but I haven't put it together yet. I'm still brand new at social media. I'm way behind schedule. So I'm older. Cut me some slack. But in my link tree, you'll see my other social media. This live and all of the lives that I do are recorded and they get uploaded to both my YouTube channel and my Rumble channel. Rumble's just another site like a YouTube. And so if you want to check it out, it'll be up tonight. The interview Eddie and I did, if you want to listen, because he's been here for about an hour and 20 minutes or so. You can watch it later. It'll be up before the night's out. So that'll be cool. But towards the bottom of my link tree, if you click through, and by the way, if you're outside the United States, which I don't know why TikTok does this, but the clickable link that I put in my bio only works for the United States. I don't know why. So I've written in the bottom of my bio, Linktree Chip Barnes. You just have to type that into a web browser. It'll take you to the same place. If you scroll down towards the bottom, I also have a Patreon account. Mine is only $5 a month. I don't have big spenders like Eddie does for the book, but just $5 a month. And there's right now I'm going to be adding one live per week that's just for my Patreon subscribers. It's going to be on a Zoom call, and that way we can say whatever the hell we want. You can ask questions. You can get involved more so than just putting in a comment. So hopefully you'll do that. So back on point with the topic real quickly, getting back to Ben Shapiro and Candace Owens. This is a fun story. So Eddie mentioned that Norman Finkelstein touched Candace Owens' heart on having a child. The fact that children are being hurt in Gaza. And she didn't know much about this in terms of, other than her conservative beliefs. So as an expecting mother, she was like, this is wrong. They're unaliving thousands of kids, for God's sakes. So she and Ben got into a very heated public feud on Twitter, where she said that he was walking around like an immature brat, spouting from the top of his lungs to justify Israel's killing of children, and that it's fair for someone else to point out, why should a bunch of children be getting killed? And it was back and forth for about 2 weeks. It was like all the talk of the town on social media. So if you have a chance, go back and watch some of the videos, because it's fun when two people on the same conservative team start fighting. I got to tell you that I enjoyed every last moment of that. It was a lot of fun. So
Same here.
in terms of Israel, Gaza, in terms of what's happening, Eddie, we've seen the Israeli military move in. It has a physical presence. It's destroyed most of the north of Gaza, and it's occupying and destroying more infrastructure. We talked about the selfies and the videos a moment ago. So, but it can't seem to get rid of Hamas. It can't seem to get, because of the tunnels, and there's so many of the tunnels underground, they can't seem to get rid of these people. What do you see is going to happen next? Is Israel going to try to make a permanent presence and stay, maybe occupy the northern half of Gaza? Or are they going to try to take over everything and push people out into the Sinai, continue to bomb the hell out of people and unalive people at record rates? I know they've hit some people in these little tent cities that have been set up in Rafah. And what about the West Bank? What are your thoughts about the whole thing?
Yeah, it's so hard to say. I mean, today or yesterday, Norman Finkelstein debated Rabbi Shmuley, who's just this really eccentric Zionist. He actually works with the Robert F. Kennedy campaign. But that was the question they were asking was, what is the end game here? And Shmuley had no answer. He just, repeated Zionist talking points. And I don't know what Finkelstein thinks the end game is. I'd love to ask him that question and get his opinion. But I mean, I'm terrified of what it could be. Is it just continue to bomb these people over and over and over again until they say, Hamas is no more? What does that even look like? And like there was a leaked intelligence report. I'm sure you heard about this earlier this year or maybe last year sometime that, said the plan, which has been a long-term Zionist plan, but they said their plan with this war was to push the Palestinians through the Rafah crossing with Egypt into the Sinai desert, just push them out of Gaza. Now, are they going to be able to push, almost 2 million people, just push them into the desert and leave them there? I don't know. That doesn't seem like a super realistic plan. So what are they going to do in the meantime? I guess just keep bombing them and keep causing destruction. I think them occupying northern Gaza is a realistic scenario. Taking more of the land. That's usually what has followed Israel military successes, and I hesitate to even call it a success because they're just carpet bombing kids and people who are locked in what's essentially an open air concentration camp. But like in 1967, their military successes caused them or allowed them to seize vast swaths of land, which the UN has said that they have to return ever since, and they never have. So I think the seizure of more land is entirely possible, and I think they'll go as far with the ethnic cleansing campaign as they can before, I don't know, maybe at some point Biden and the U.S. hit a breaking point and they're like, all right, guys, you got to stop. Because that's happened in the past. Like in the past, I know Reagan has told Israel to chill when they were, waging one of these horrific, bloody campaigns. So yeah,
That was up into Lebanon. That was Ronald Reagan called Menachem Begin and said, "Quit."
hmm So maybe that happens at some point. I hope so, but I don't see an end in sight at this point, which is very scary.
Yeah, I agree. It's really it's indeterminate right now. That's one of the real questions. And the other question is what happens if it spills over? What if Israel doesn't stop? And other than just the Houthis with what they're doing in the Red Sea, what if Lebanon gets involved and starts raining down missiles on Tel Aviv and Haifa and elsewhere? What will happen then? We already know the Israelis have been bombing Lebanon. They obviously took out a senior H group official with a very targeted drone strike in Beirut, the capital of Lebanon. I mean, this is more of a question for the Scott Ritters of the world. If you don't follow Scott Ritter, former weapons inspector, he talks about this stuff. But I think that, do you think that's the wild card? And if something like that happened, do you think it could really become a regional or even a global conflict? Is that possible?
Yeah, I was gonna say the exact same thing. That's funny. I was gonna say, you need a military analyst like Scott Ritter to answer that question. I'm just a geopolitical analyst.
Yeah,
He's
fair
his
enough.
military expertise is something else. But recommend people check out Scott Ritter. But now sorry, I got confused. What was the question again?
Well, in other words, if Lebanon were to get involved,
Oh, yeah.
if people can't, one of the Arab states just quote unquote cannot take it anymore, and they feel like they have to act, what could happen next? Do you think?
Yeah, I think that's definitely an option of inflaming a regional war. I mean, I know some people thought Hezbollah was going to get involved as soon as Israel entered Gaza with ground troops, which is not the case. But we saw last week or this week Israel dropping bombs on Lebanon, increasing hostilities with Hezbollah. Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen have only gotten stronger in the last decade because Israel keeps bombing them. Israel keeps bombing their countries, and then that makes it really easy for these anti-Zionist militias like the Houthis and Hezbollah to recruit people. Like, oh, your home got blown up by Israel? Join us. We're fighting Israel. So they've continued to grow. We see the Houthis being the most courageous people in, maybe I should be careful of what I say so I don't get banned here, but they're actually standing up to the Zionists. Unlike a lot of these Arab states, they're enforcing a blockade in the Red Sea, targeting Israeli ships, which is weakening Israel. Israel's economy is down 20%, which is only partially because of the Houthi blockade, also because they're funneling all their money into bombing Gaza and pulling up reservists to go fight in Gaza. But it absolutely could inflame a regional war. And then you have, for sure, the Houthis and Hezbollah. And obviously, Yemen doesn't share a border with Israel, but they have the Red Sea, one of Israel's most important trade routes. You have them, you have H Group in Gaza, of course, and you have Hezbollah. And then you have the wild cards of Iran and Syria, who, if Hezbollah gets pulled in, they could also get pulled in. And that's why people even people who aren't super anti-Zionist are still criticizing the Biden administration for vetoing a ceasefire because it's reckless. Just like the war in Ukraine could be pushing us closer to a nuclear conflict with Russia, this war in Gaza could be pushing us closer to a regional conflict in the Middle East, a giant, giant war that would pull in all these different actors. So yeah, I mean, that would be interesting. That could spell the collapse of the state of Israel, but it would also mean a lot of human suffering.
Did you? Yeah, good points. One quick administrative note for those of you typing questions into the chat. Please don't use all caps. If you could, just use regular text. I've been catching your questions as much as I can. I'm going to ask Eddie some, and then we're going to take some others. One of the ones that came through the comments, Eddie, was the role of the International Court of Justice. We know that they went through a preliminary process where they called for a release of the hostages. And they also didn't make a final determination about the declaration of genocide, although they did call for a sort of a suggested ceasefire, but not a mandatory one. A lot of Israeli commentators have said, see, we're not guilty of this. The ICJ said so. Not so true. There's a second step they have to go through, which requires a lot more detail and a lot of gathering. What are your thoughts on what role that will play in the short and long term vis-a-vis the US and Israel?
Yeah, despite what the Zionists have said, the International Court did not rule that Israel's not committing a genocide. They ruled, in fact, that it's very plausible that they are, and then ordered them to avoid it. And then now they're gathering more facts and stuff, like you said. But and I've learned this from reading Finkelstein's book about Gaza, which is called Gaza: An Inquest into Its Martyrdom. It's like a 400-page book that details the record of Israel Palestine and its relation to international law and international bodies like the UN. And for a body like the International Court of Justice to rule that there's a plausible case for Israel committing genocide is way farther than any international body has ever gone in condemning or scolding or criticizing Israel. So it's a landmark thing. And the 82-page single-spaced case put together by South Africa is an incredible compilation of Israel's crimes and an incredible compilation of maniac rhetoric from Israeli politicians and IDF leaders towards the Palestinian Arab population, basically encouraging the carnage. So it's a huge deal. It was debated today or yesterday on the Piers Morgan Uncensored show between Finkelstein and that guy Rabbi Shmuley, and they debate the case, and it's a total W for Finkelstein. He's able to, bring up the facts of the case, and it really exposes Israel and the IDF for what they're actually doing. Now, Shmuley and the Zionists will try to lie about the case. They'll say that it exonerated Israel, but that's simply not true. I mean, just read the International Court's decision. So I think it's a very, very big deal, even though it's, international law is sort of toothless because powerful countries just kind of do whatever they want. But as far as changing public opinion, I think it is a very big deal.
Yeah, for those who didn't see the interview, I don't know. I mean, it was hard to watch for me because Piers Morgan would ask a question. Norman Finkelstein would be patient, stay quiet, would answer the question exactly as it was addressed. Shmuley got on, and all he did was attack Finkelstein for all of his different transgressions, telling him he's not a scholar and disparaging him personally. And then Piers Morgan would say, well, yeah, but what about the question? And Shmuley would go into another diatribe, wouldn't answer the question. Same old tactics, deflect, never answer directly, always say Israel's defending itself, always play the victim. Now, Eddie, I wanted to bring something up that somebody wrote in the chat, and I wanted to see what your response is to this statement. Someone named Israel Belongs to the Jews, that's their username, said the IDF, and this is in all caps, the IDF is the most moral army in the world. What are your thoughts about that statement?
I'd have to disagree. I'd have to say they're possibly one of the least moral armies in the world. No matter how many times you say the IDF are the most moral army in the world, doesn't make it true. And if you want to know what the IDF is actually engaged in, I'm trying to think of the organization. They interview former IDF soldiers, and
It's called Breaking the Silence.
Yes. Read the testimonies from Breaking the Silence if you want to know whether or not the IDF is the most moral army in the world. Because IDF soldiers will go to that organization and they will spill everything. They tell the most horrific stories of, attacking civilians at point blank, bombing residential areas, having no idea who's in, in these homes before they get bombed, and oftentimes contradict, like the IDF will come out and say, well, there were Hamas tunnels under this house, that's why we bombed it. Or the Hamas was using this hospital, H group was using this hospital as a base, so we needed to bomb it. And then the IDF soldiers will go to Breaking the Silence and be like, we had no idea, if H group was in these places. We were just firing tank shells at them, firing artillery at them, and stuff like that. So yeah, I would argue one of the most moral armies in the world, and I know people will disagree with this, but China's People's Liberation Army. They're not involved in any foreign wars. They've planted a forest the size of Ireland. They're involved in construction projects, reforestation projects, and that's the kind of thing you can reinvest your military in or your country's resources in if you're not engaged in all these foreign conflicts around the world, like the U.S. military is, or like the IDF is in Gaza.
Now, here's another thing that was said by someone named Jimmy in the comments. It says the H Army, I'm assuming he means Hamas, uses water pipes to launch rockets. So have you heard of this, Eddie? The idea is that they either dig up, or when supplies are let in by Israel, they divert the pipes that are supposed to use to distribute water, and they cut them up and make crude, unguided rockets using these pipes. Is that something you've heard? And do you think that's an accurate allegation, or is that inaccurate? How do you feel about that?
I've heard of it, obviously. I don't know the validity of it, but ultimately, it's nothing but a talking point by Israel to deflect from the strangulation of Gaza that's been going on since 2006, I believe. Is that when they placed the embargo on Gaza? So Israel essentially doesn't let anything in or out. They don't let any trade in or out. And it's not just weapons, it's all all sorts of different types of food. And then 97% of the water in Gaza is undrinkable because of that. There's all sorts of shortages. Or not the vast majority, but the majority of the population, like 60 to 70%, are unemployed. And that's all because Israel doesn't allow anything in or out. They surround the region with their military and put it under a siege. And we talked about the effect of economic sanctions and embargoes earlier on this live. And I mean, if it's bad for Venezuela and Cuba, imagine the Gaza Strip. It's tiny, and what are they supposed to be able to produce, especially when in 2008, in 2014, and now in 2023 and 2024, Israel has carpet bombed their infrastructure. They've destroyed like the only flour mills in Gaza. They've destroyed a lot of the electricity plants. They've destroyed the productive base of Gaza. So not only can they not produce anything, but they can't import or export any goods. So they're choked off from the global economy and prevented from having their own economy. So that's what's devastated the economy of Gaza. But Israel likes to say, no, they only have bad drinking water because of age group. They dug up all the pipes and turned them into fireworks. It's like, okay, yeah, I'm sure it has nothing to do with the embargo, guys.
Yeah, it's kind of tough to make the desert flourish or desert bloom when you don't have the things available to make it bloom. And someone cuts off your financial stuff, your different supplies, doesn't let in things you need to build stuff properly. Things get demolished by somebody else, and then you can't rebuild it. Your self sufficiency is cut off at the knees. And then you say, well, why don't you have your own water? Why don't you have your own electricity? Why don't you have your own medical stuff? Because they can't do it because it's been destroyed, especially water desalination facilities, if I can say that properly. So this is another concept I wanted to float across and make sure the audience knows about it, and you can share it with them, Eddie. What is group punishment? What are some examples of how the Israelis are using it, and why is it a war crime?
Yeah, so group punishment or collective punishment would be holding an entire population guilty for the crimes of their government or for the crimes of, say, age group. Right now they're holding the Palestinians or enforcing collective punishment on the Palestinian population that had nothing to do with even people who had nothing to do with October 7th because of the actions of the age group on October 7th. Actions which are based in resistance to colonialism and resistance to occupation, but still actions that most of Palestine doesn't have anything to do with. So, and the reason that Israel tries to deny that they're enforcing collective punishment or group punishment is because it's against international law. So if you could prove that Israel was enforcing collective punishment, then you could take them to, or you could, charge them with war crimes. So what they do is they say, no, we're only targeting age group. When we bomb a hospital, it's because age group was using it as a base. When we bomb a UN facility, it's because age group had tunnels underneath it. Everything is because of age group. But if you read Finkelstein's Gaza book, he shows time and time and time again that Israel is firing on residential areas with the explicit purpose of targeting civilians and then claiming that they're targeting a resistance group. So they are enforcing collective punishment. It's obvious to anyone who looks at the statistic. I mean, 10,000 children have lost their lives in the last 130 days. Are they all members of age group? Of course not. No, Israel is making them to pay for the crimes of a group that they have nothing to do with. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if I think it was Defense Minister Gallant on television said that we are dealing with human animals. There will be no water, no food, no electricity, no medical supplies, no nothing. And the impact of that is really, really starting to come to bear, especially in North Gaza. There are people that are sick, that have no access to care because of the damage done not only to hospitals, but the forcible removal and arrest in some cases of the staff. Men have been marched out in their underwear who are just normal civilians, just shop owners and plumbers, electricians, whatever it may be, are forced to strip from their clothing or taken out into fields or held in the street and made fun of, which is also a war crime, to dehumanize and humiliate people on camera. There's just so many things the Israelis choose to do in their onslaught of Gaza that are so incredibly unnecessary, that are indicative of revenge, not going after a particular militant or enemy. And what they tell their population to try to justify it is that we're the good guys. We're going through and going after militants in all cases, that the missions that our pilots go on are carefully vetted by a team of attorneys. And also, we're very careful to send out warning shots so that everybody knows we send down leaflets. And then and only then do we do what we do as far as destroying a target. No other army in the world does all this, is what they say. Well, guess what? No army in the world does that, because the Israelis, most of the time, don't do that. In fact, on this very phone that I'm looking at right now, I probably have 50 or 60 videos that were shot from a different rooftop by different journalists, the ones that many of whom have unfortunately died at the hands of the Israelis, showing none of this happening. No leaflets, no soft tap, no warning. Boom, a missile comes down on a building, or a piece of artillery, or a dumb bomb being dropped from a plane, or some version of all three, destroying vast swaths of residential areas, killing countless numbers of innocent men, women, and children. For what reason? Because the Israeli military can. And there's nothing moral about that. So how can you call that a moral army? I will never understand how that term could be anywhere near the same zip code as the Israeli military.
Exactly. It's nothing but a propaganda talking point because they know. I mean, the Zionists have to know deep down what they're doing. At least some of them do. Maybe some of the civilians are more naive, but people who know Netanyahu personally have described him as a narcissist and a sociopath. Like, he knows what he's doing. He's not stupid. He knows that the IDF is enforcing collective punishment. But he's doing it to stay in power, further his own political career, and further Israel's, ultimate goal of pushing the Palestinians off their land and taking it for themselves.
Yeah, and there's been a pattern of when they have dropped leaflets suggesting that certain civilians relocate, not only have they been harmed on their way down what's supposed to be the safe corridor by bombings or even snipers sometimes, or maybe both, but once they reach the safe zone or destination that they've been told to go to, that's been bombed. We saw this recently in Rafah, where some of the tent cities that have been built, sort of these little shanty towns that are terrible living conditions, and they've been bombed. I mean, what are people to do when they go to these safe zones and they still have artillery and aircraft bombing coming down on their heads, and their children and their women are dying? What are they supposed to do? How is the world supposed to look at that and say, make sense of that, Eddie?
I don't know. I think people are having trouble making sense of it. And as they look at it and see all the suffering, they look more into the conflict and they realize these people are trapped in an open air prison. They're trapped in a concentration camp being bombed, being locked off or blocked off from the rest of the world. And it's sickening. It's mind blowing that anyone could still support it. And the only reason that they do is because of the sheer amount of Zionist propaganda, which is why I think this is an important book, because this really helped me understand how people support Zionism.
Can you slowly repeat the title and the author?
Yeah, On Zionist Literature by Ghassan Kanafani.
So it's On Zionist Literature. That's the name of the book, that talks about how the Zionists frame their arguments and try to justify their behavior from their point of view, how they, I hate to use the word indoctrinate, but how they propagandize their people to have a very different set of beliefs and allow the Israeli military and the government to carry out its will while its population is unaware or paints it in a different light that seems justifiable.
Right. And what the Zionists have done is tell Jewish people from a young age, you need to support Israel so the Holocaust doesn't happen again. If you're Jewish, you need to support Israel. And what the Zionists do is they manipulate Jewish religious values and, Jewish religious stories and character archetypes that have been around for thousands or hundreds of years, and they transform them and manipulate them into Zionist stories or Zionist character archetypes. And they indoctrinate young Jewish people with this from a young age and tell them, the whole while they're growing up, that you need to support Israel, otherwise the Holocaust might happen again. So that's why so many people, that helped me at least understand where some of these people are coming from with defending Israel. And I get it. I was raised in an evangelical Christian household that said, the Jews are God's chosen people, so therefore you always need to support Israel. So, people are indoctrinated from a young age, but of course that's starting to change. Israel's popularity with the Jewish population has steadily been decreasing. I mean, even you could even say rapidly decreasing as Israel has shifted right and as their actions have gotten more blatant and heinous and violent. A lot of young Jewish people are turning away from them. Adam Friedland, a comedian, did an excellent video talking about how his visit to Israel, his visit to the West Bank, really was a light bulb for him, where he, saw through all this propaganda where he had been told his whole life, we need to support Israel or the Holocaust will happen again. Then he goes to the West Bank and he sees the Israelis living in mansions while the Palestinians are living in slums. And he's like, oh no, this isn't what I thought it was. This is a failure of a project. So it is decreasing in popularity, but they're good at convincing people to support them.
Yeah, one of the tools I mentioned over and over again, you've probably heard of this, Eddie, but in case you haven't, and those in the audience haven't heard of this, there was a young Jewish American woman by the name of Anna Baltzer, and she was talking with some friends of hers in the United States. She was brought up in a very pro-Israel, pro-Zionist household, and some of her friends were sharing with her some of their stories about what happens in the West Bank, and she thought they were propagandized, like they're telling her a bunch of lies. This can't be true. You guys are indoctrinated, blah, blah, blah. And so they challenged her. They said, Anna, why don't you go visit for yourself? Go see. If you think we're wrong, come back and tell us. We'll apologize. So she did. She went and visited the occupied territories. She went to a city called Ramallah, and she stayed with a Palestinian family for just under 6 months. And what she learned, just like Eddie was saying from this other person, she was shocked. She couldn't believe the difference between what she thought she knew about how people live there and the disparities not being that big of a deal, and what she came to learn about, the dozens of things that Palestinians have to endure, from the most egregious inconveniences that make day-to-day living tough on up to actually being, unalived and everything in between. And she created a documentary because she was so taken aback by what she learned that she sort of made a personal commitment to come back and tell the truth. And so she encapsulated her experiences into a documentary that anybody can look up on YouTube and watch. It's about 45 minutes long. And it details all the things that she experienced, the Palestinians endured. It's a total mind bender. It's like what I learned some of back in 1989. So it's if you look on YouTube, you have to search for it exactly this way because YouTube is suppressing the video. But the name of the video, if you type in Anna Baltzer, Life in Occupied Palestine. It's a really important thing to share with people because if you have anybody who's Zionist, I was contacted today on TikTok by somebody who's a reservist with the IDF. And the person said this. He said, hey, I've served in the Army and I've watched some of your videos and I think you have it completely wrong. You don't understand what's really going on. And I said, okay. I'd love to have you as a guest on the next live. I gave him the schedule. And I said, but before you come on, I have 2 requirements. The first one is you watch Anna Baltzer, Life in Occupied Palestine. And number 2, you watch Abby Martin's Gaza Fights for Freedom. And if you're willing to watch both of those in good faith, and I'll ask you some questions before we get to talking, then I'll have you on. And if you're not willing to do that, then I'm not interested in talking. So we'll see what happens. And you can use that same sort of challenge to somebody and say, hey, I heard somebody talking like you're talking a couple of weeks ago. They watched this video and now they have a completely different view that they just didn't know they didn't know. So I hope you'll share those resources with people. There's a lot of great other ones too, but those are 2 great starting primers to get an idea of what's really going on so people can see. Having empathy for others is a really important quality. And even if you disagree, if you want to still support your government, at least understanding what somebody else is going through makes you more human.
Absolutely. That was Gaza Fights for Freedom was one of the first movies I watched. The guy who alerted me to what was going on with Israel-Palestine, that was what he watched. to teach him. I gave that movie to my parents, but they ended up watching a different movie. I can't think of the name of it, but it showed the Palestinian situation since the embargo and, radically altered the way that they view the situation. So it's just getting that information out there, which is so heavily suppressed, like you said. But once you show people those movies, it changes hearts and minds.
Yeah, and someone named Angelia or Angela Bloom mentioned a couple good ones. So she mentioned the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, if you want the bigger history. This was written by a Jewish Israeli scholar named Ilyan Pape. So it's called The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. It's a great read. And then another great read is called The 100 Years War. Yeah, The 100 Years War on Palestine by Rashid Khalidi. That's a great book to read too. I've read those two as well as others. Norman Finkelstein's books. I've read all his work. I've read Noam Chomsky's work on the subject. There's all sorts of great scholars that write about the subject. And there are some that write from the other side. I read Alan Dershowitz's book, The Case for Israel, just to be curious to see what his arguments were. And it's all the same talking points, all the same BS. We're just one little small Jewish state among all these crazy Arab countries, all that's woe is me type stuff. Meanwhile, they're the ones hammering their neighbor into submission and claiming they're the victim. It's an insane way to do stuff. Eddie, I wanted to do a time check for you. How are you doing on time? It's 9:30 your time, right?
Yeah, good.
Okay.
I should probably get going pretty soon, like in the next 15 minutes, but
Okay, great.
enjoying
So
the
what I wanted to do is
conversation.
give the audience a chance. If anybody wanted to ask Eddie a few questions while we still have him here, another good one is called Tantora. It's the recollection of Israeli soldiers in one of the massacres that took place in one of the Palestinian villages during the Nakba. The village was Tantora, and it's pretty bad. And they're laughing about stuff they did that was horrific. It's hard to watch, but important to watch to understand the brutality and the indifference that the Israelis had towards the Arab population as they took over the territory.
Y-
It's
That
bad.
that movie has some of the most insane clips I've ever seen of the
Yeah, it's
older
pretty bad.
IDF soldiers talking about the Nakba. It's like that. Imagine what they did before there were social media and cameras to expose their
Yeah,
crime.
and that's only the stuff that we've heard about. I mean, so many atrocities happen with no documentation and no stories getting out. Okay, I'm going to repeat those resources. Somebody asked which ones they were. So the first one is Anna Baltzer, Life in Occupied Palestine. It's a 45-minute video, free to watch on YouTube. The second one is done by journalist Abby Martin, and it's called Gaza Fights for Freedom. It's a great documentary. And then as far as another one is Tantura, Tantura, Tantura. It's also on YouTube for free. Another video, which we didn't mention, but I think you should also consider watching, very well done. It's called Al Nakba, like Al Franken, Nakba, Nakba, Al Nakba. That's a good one. In terms of books, you have The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. You have Norman Finkelstein. That's by Jewish Israeli scholar Ilyan Pape. And then you have a book by Norman Finkelstein called Gaza: An Inquest to Its Martyrdom. And nobody knows Gaza better than Norman Finkelstein. Okay, if you forget any of these, just to let you know, we're at about the 2.5 hour mark, and this video is recorded. So it'll be up on my YouTube and Rumble channels. So if you want to come back in and review the titles, you don't have to memorize everything. You can check it out. So there's that. And then in terms of other books, you have The 100 Years War on Palestine. The 100 Years War on Palestine. That should be enough to wet your whistle between the documentaries and the books. And there's more, but you can look them up on Google. If you just search the topic, you'll find stuff. So what I want to do, Eddie, is I want to see if we can get some questions coming up. Guest wise, I tell you, do you mind, Eddie, if I bring up some guests? It'll minimize us a bit, but maybe we can have a brief conversation with a couple guests.
For sure.
Okay, real quick, we have Dean and Beck and someone named Bilal who's been waiting very patiently. So I'm going to let Bilal go first, ask a question of me or Eddie, and then we'll let Dean come on in. Hi, Bilal.
Hey Chip and hey Eddie. First of all, I just want to say thank you both for your efforts in, supporting Palestine, getting the word out. I've been following both of you guys for a while now. Eddie, I saw your debate with Destiny online. You absolutely obliterated him. He had no idea what he was talking about. And we know Chip and all of his efforts. So thank you both for that. And I've known Chip for a while since he first got on TikTok, but they banned my account actually. So,
Mm.
but my question was for Eddie was that me personally, I lean towards the socialism aspect of economics, but I just want to know, are there any pros of capitalism that you would see? And I know the U.S. is not a good example because to me, the U.S. is completely unchecked capitalism. Um, but what do you think of I guess, the basis or idea of capitalism in its early stages, I guess?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I also got into this in that middle ground video I did with Jubilee that I mentioned earlier. But from a Marxist perspective, capitalism plays a progressive role in history. So not only does it vastly increase the productive forces and increase technology, creating the basis for a possible socialist society, but it's an improvement over feudalism of the past. Like the Enlightenment was an improvement. You know, we overcame as a species and as society the divine right of kings. We overcame these feudal economic structures and moved forward towards bourgeois economic structures. And once the bourgeoisie seizes power and establishes itself as the new ruling class, at that point it ceases to be progressive. It starts to be regressive, whereas the proletariat becomes the new progressive class. But and in relation to the U.S., like capitalism today, yes, we're in late stage imperialist monopoly capitalism. There's not much good to see in it. But compared to slavery, compared to the antebellum South, capitalism was a step forward. We fought the Civil War in order to abolish slavery and move history forward to capitalism. So capitalism has its role in history, in the progress of history, but at this point in history's development, it's nothing but a regressive anti-human force.
Right.
Makes sense.
That makes sense.
Dean, would you like to ask a question to Eddie or to myself?
Hey, good evening, gentlemen. Chip, I've spoken to you a couple times in the past, man. Always quick in and out, just always saying, supporting, good on you guys. What I want to do, Eddie, I see you guys are talking about the finances and capitalism. What I just want to kind of throw out here, we've been working hard. We, as in me and other people, we've been playing follow the money trail. And what a lot of people don't know, you have some Israeli hedge funds that are shorting American-based companies. They're doing it through American subsidiaries as well. So they're basically bankrupting American companies to in turn take the profits that they're getting, reinvesting it into Albit, Raytheon, and in some instances directly just giving flat out donations to.
Dean, can you just tell the audience what it means to short a company so they understand what you're talking about?
Yeah, so essentially when you're shorting a company, you're betting that that company's value is going to go down, that company isn't worth what they say it is. So as a hedge fund, they say that this company, we say it's worth $1, they say it's worth 50 cents. If they drive the value of it down, they make money while everybody else loses their shirt. The company then loses its value. Generally speaking, they go bankrupt. Then the hedge funds just keep making more and more money, and they just keep doing that. So as long as they have the money to do that, they can basically just keep doing it. But what we've done, we've narrowed down two major hedge funds. We've found two companies that they have such long position shorts for. We are doing our due diligence in the backgrounds right now. When we're ready and we have it all down set, we are
Squeeze
going
them.
to make these billionaires hemorrhage.
Squeeze them.
Squeeze them. You got it. Yes, Chip. Squeeze them. Now, look, I am not a millionaire. I'm talking to you from the confines of a closet right now. Okay? Right? The people that are involved with this, we're not millionaires. But collective together, we do have a following. I don't have as much as you guys. I've got 25,000, which I'm very happy, and they're all great people, right? Like they all are. We are going to release the information. Everyone can have their own due diligence. We are going to squeeze them. We are going to squeeze them and squeeze them and squeeze them.
Can you tell them what does it mean to squeeze a bunch of shorts? What does that mean?
So essentially, we're calling out on options. So if they say that it's worth 50 cents, the company's at $1, we say it's worth $500. Well, the hedge funds have taken position to drive that stock down. However, if the general public, us, the short guys, the little guys, the people that are in this, essentially our goal here, for me anyways, look, if you want to get in on this to make money, fine. I want to get in on this to make sure they don't have a cent to buy one more casing for one more round. That's my goal, okay? So I'm going to basically say, if they say that it's valued at 50 cents, company's valued at $1, I'm going to say that's worth $500. And I am not selling a single share until that company hits $500. And those hedge funds have to keep basically trying to cover their position. So they just bleed out money to infinity and beyond. And the people that are hedging the position, bringing it long, making sure that they bleed out their money. And I hope that Eve person is still in the chat, because I'm going to make every one of those banks out there just hurt me and everyone out there. Inshallah.
Yeah, I actually do trading for a living, so let me explain to you what it means, what a short squeeze is. So first of all, to take a short position, what you're basically doing is you're borrowing shares that somebody else owns through a broker. So let's say a broker owns 1 million shares of Apple. And let's say Apple's trading at $150 a share. You think Apple's going to fall in value, so you'll borrow the shares and then you'll sell them into the market. And now you have an obligation to buy them back at some point and give them back to the broker. So you're on the hook. Now, if Apple goes down $10, you can buy the shares back for the broker, but you have to buy them back at some point. If Apple goes up in value, instead of making the $10 when it went down to $140, because you're buying it for less than you sold it, you have to buy it back for $10 higher, which means you're losing $10 a share. So what happens in a short squeeze is that there's so many people buying that there's not enough shares available to buy back. People keep bidding the stock up. So instead of buying it back for 160, the bid goes to 170, goes to 180, 190. And these people who are stuck on the short side of the market, they have to buy back 1 million shares because they've been overdoing it. And there's not enough inventory at lower prices to buy back the shares. So the shares just go through the moon. This happened with GameStop. This happened with AMC and a number of other companies during the meme period, the meme stock period. And a bunch of hedge funds got caught off sides and they couldn't buy their shares back and their companies were underwater. They couldn't buy back. They were just completely out of business. So that's how a short squeeze works.
Right. So we've been doing our homework, and again, we want to offer a tremendous amount of due diligence. We're looking at companies at hedge funds, particularly one hedge fund and one Israeli bank that's working through a subsidiary in America, and we want to make sure that they've been going out to the same ones, kind of targeting, because we understand that there are people that aren't involved somehow. You know what I mean, like through banks and stuff like that. You don't want the regular plumber losing his shirt, right? But at the end of the day, we've come to it like that. We've looked at it in this essence, and the difference between us and GameStop was a very loosely unorganized, and it became organized near the end of it. We want to offer, we have teams already brokered up. You're on information, you're on release duties, you're on like this. Like we want to, when the time comes, because we need to cut off the head of the serpent. And when you can't buy a bomb, you're going to start borrowing money from who, right? It ain't going to be from us, not anymore. My government, as a Canadian, and I'll just finish with this. As a Canadian, my government giving $28.5 million for non-lethal aids in the forms of weapons, guidance systems, and other things and other such. And I've got friends right now that have to explain to their kids why they have to wait till Tuesday for their check to come in because the fridge is empty. That does not sit well. While there are kids, you're throwing on TV and you're seeing the rubble. I like to say that, the rubble, right? Like the destruction. It's not destruction. You look at it, there are people under there. There's people in that, man. Anyways, I'm preaching to the choir. Look, as always, you guys are doing great. Much love. Keep up the good fight. Free Palestine.
Thanks, Dean. Thanks for being here. Appreciate that. Yeah, that's a great idea, by the way. It's always nice to see creative thinkers to find ways to kind of take on the establishment. And that'd be a cool spectacle to watch play out. If I can get involved in it, I will, and donate the money to people in Gaza. That'd be awesome.
Same
Would
here.
love that. There was somebody in the chat. Her name was, I forget her first name. She said, all from the comfort of your tunnel. I guess that's a reference meaning that me and Eddie or whomever else came on are all part of this H group support structure. No, 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 no. I think it's good to differentiate. First of all, I show all the sympathy in the world for people who were unalived that were civilians on 10/7. That's horrible. And to the extent that people committed war crimes, they should be held accountable, both the leadership as well as people who did it with their own two hands. And I think it works both ways. For those in the Israeli chain of command, including the pilots and or the soldiers who have used their weapons and their capabilities to unalive civilians on purpose, is also a war crime. They should be held accountable, as should the US leadership, who's been financially, militarily, and politically supporting said genocide. So fair is fair. So no tunnels, just the comfort of my living room and my smartphone with this silly light pointing at me. Eddie from his wrestling background. If there's no other questions, let me see if there are any questions coming in for Eddie. And I think that's going to probably tie it
Follow-up
up.
question.
Yeah, one more quick question, Bilal, and then we're going to let Eddie go.
Okay, so this is shifting towards the Israel and Hamas conflict. I don't know if you guys both watched the Norman Finkelstein versus Rabbi Shmuley video.
Yeah.
But we've seen this question being asked. We all know is, do you condemn H group? I want to know how you guys go ahead and answer that, because when you say yes, then you're essentially condemning any idea of resistance, not necessarily just H group. So how would you answer the question with the caveat of what H group did in some aspect, but how do you answer without condemning resistance?
How about if you go first, Eddie?
Okay. Yeah, I wouldn't condemn them. I would condemn, and I said this in the Destiny debate that you mentioned, and echoing what Chip said, specific war crimes and targetings of civilians. I think that anybody on both sides should avoid that, right? You should, in a war, you should only target military installations, or that, you should avoid bringing civilians into it. If people look at a lot of the gray zones reporting, obviously on October 7th, though, Israel was kind of indiscriminately firing with Apache helicopters, and there are eyewitness testimonies saying that Israel probably unalived a lot of their own civilians on that day, more so than H group even. But I would compare it the same way Finkelstein does to Nat Turner's slave rebellion. In Nat Turner's slave rebellion, horrible things happened. Civilians were killed, which is tragic, and you can condemn that. But ultimately, it was a rebellion against the institution of slavery, and that is why H group resistance exists. It's a rebellion against occupation. It's a rebellion against apartheid. It's a rebellion by a people who are unemployed, drinking dirty water, locked in a concentration camp by their occupiers, rising up against their occupiers. And, yes, it's terrible to see civilians lose their lives, but civilians are losing their lives because Israel put the Palestinians in a concentration camp. I mean, that's the precondition that allowed for H group to launch Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. So I wouldn't condemn them. I wouldn't, say I condemn H group flat out. You could condemn specific actions by them, but I frame it or look at it through the same framework as Nat Turner's slave rebellion in the U.S.
Yeah, great point in terms of making historical context and connection with, what would you do in that circumstance? How would you look at it if you were the victim of an occupation or some sort of oppressive situation? So I answered a couple ways. I say to the person, listen, the idea of condemning makes a lot of sense. Let's put this in context. I'll make you a deal. If you condemn the Nakba and the gangs that use terroristic tactic, including, Menachem Begin and, David Ben-Gurion, if you'll condemn that, if you'll condemn the occupation, if you'll condemn the blockade of Gaza and all of the death and destruction that have come with that, I'll condemn H group. Do we have a deal? And I get this blank stare, like, well, that's not the same. It's not the same. Well, I'll tell you what. Do you condemn the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising? Because if you want to condemn that, I'll condemn the H group's uprising too with you. Because you can't have it both ways. Which way do you want to have it?
Yeah, great answers from both of you guys. It was a pleasure listening to you guys. I encourage anyone who hasn't followed both Eddie and Chip to go ahead and follow them, look at their YouTubes. great content. It's really a gem to find you guys, honestly. Like there's no one else that have the information that you guys have, the debate arguments that you guys have. You guys are very much on the top of my list. Um, Thank you so much, and free Palestine.
Thanks,
Bill.
Bilal. Thanks for being here. Appreciate you being a good guest. Yeah, great question, by the way. So I just want to thank Eddie, and I want to repeat one more time. Eddie, if people want to support your work, I know you have a website, midwesternmarks dot, is it .com?
Yep.
So that's Eddie. His partner in crime, Carlos, has written a book. And if you support Eddie's work on his Patreon for $10 a month, you get a copy of this great book that his partner wrote. What is the name of the book again, Eddie?
The Purity Fetish and the Crisis of Western Marxism. It's all about putting aside purity politics in order to organize and focus on things that would help all of us, like liberating Palestine.
Okay. And of course, if you haven't noticed, Eddie's one of the most prevalent content creators. He's probably one of the first persons I followed on TikTok. And it's like when you meet somebody who you've only seen through their videos, it's kind of like an exciting moment. Like that's kind of how I feel tonight has been for Eddie and I. It's been kind of cool. And likewise, he's seen my videos, but we've never talked before. I wanted to mention one more thing, Eddie. In the comments, people have been saying, we need you to do lives. Like they really, and I listen, Eddie is so busy between his wrestling work. He teaches wrestling. He does Greco-Roman wrestling himself. He does, I don't know, 6-8 videos a week. I don't know. He's got more videos coming out of his ears than I have hairs as an older person coming out of mine. How do you make all your videos? How do you get all that work done?
I've always been a really ambitious and motivated person. I've never had trouble finding motivation or energy, and I just have so much stuff I want to tell people about. Yeah, I don't make videos unless I'm motivated to make them, but I haven't run out of motivation to learn and share what I'm learning thus far. I read a lot, I guess, and when I read, I find stuff that I want to share.
Yeah, I'm always impressed. I think I watched 3 different new videos that Eddie put out just today. I mean, and probably more. I don't even know. I just like, comment, and repost. That's my routine with Eddie's videos. Like, comment, repost, and sometimes save if I want to do it. Eddie, one more time. Somebody said the book title, but if they go to your website, is it easy to find the book?
Yes, if you just go to midwesternmarks.com and look at the publishing press, you'll find all of our published works, which is a handful of like 10 different books at this point. We've got a new book coming out, which is a work of poetry, or the collected work of poetry, all about Palestine and the liberation of Palestine, from Professor Danny Shaw. So all of that's in the Midwestern Marks publishing press, on midwesternmarks.com.
All right, Eddie. Well, I can't thank you enough for being here tonight. Everybody, I'll give you a virtual round of applause for being here. Excellent job, Eddie. Thanks for being here. I really appreciate you.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm a huge fan, and this was super fun. I really enjoyed this
Yeah,
conversation, so we'll have to do it again.
yeah, exactly. Let's do it again. All right, Eddie. Have a great rest of your night, man. Thanks for being with us.
You too.
Yeah, what a great dude, huh? I mean, it's so nice the internet can bring people together like this. It's just that is the gift of social media and the internet. Of course, it has the flip side when it gets a little challenging sometimes, as I unfortunately know all too well. But yeah, what a great guest to have. I mean, what a good dude. So if you like this, if you liked having Eddie on tonight, please type a number 1 in the chat. A number 1. I want to see how many people enjoyed Eddie being here. I sure did. I want to see a bunch of 1s come through. Yeah. I mean, and what I don't know is how does the guy make so many videos? And they're all good, right? There's not one video he puts out that's like kind of a dud. So yeah, I wish I knew how to do the polls, Hannah. I'm still TikTok illiterate, unfortunately. Yeah, exactly. How can you not like Eddie? I mean, he's just a good all around dude. Somebody says he follows him. Yeah, Eddie has a YouTube channel. Everything for Eddie is Midwestern Marks. Midwestern Marks. So I just wanted to repeat before we close down tonight. Thanks for staying with us tonight, by the way, those of you who are following. I hope you'll follow me. I go live on TikTok every Wednesday night. This is my new schedule, by the way, for the people that are used to my old schedule. I used to go 6 days a week. It just got to be a little too much. I go every Wednesday night now from 8 p.m. Eastern time, usually till about 10 p.m. We went a little later tonight because of Eddie. And then every Saturday, I do a 4-hour block from 12 noon to 4 p.m. And the usual format is we have a lot of guests that come up on a panel and we talk about stuff. Sometimes we have great sort of rigorous debates with people who are pro-Israel, which is great. My way of doing things is I try to listen to people, give them a chance to speak their mind, 2-3 minutes, don't interrupt them, and then have a civil exchange that's decent and really listen to each other. At least that's what I try to do. I've never once called somebody a name. Like I go on these other lives, and they've gotten better, some of them, but they can be pretty brutal too, unfortunately. So this is recorded, by the way. So if you missed part of the conversation, you want to go back, you can go to my YouTube channel, which is also listed in my link in bio. It just says Linktree Chip Barnes. So I have a YouTube channel that's on that list, and I have a Rumble channel. Rumble, if you don't know what Rumble is, it's just another company like YouTube, very similar, just different ownership. If you click on the link tree in my bio, it'll take you there. You'll see that. You'll see some other social media. You'll see some Telegram groups. Just click, you'll see what's up with that. And then towards the bottom, if you want to help support my work, I hope you'll support Eddie, but if you want to support me, anything you give on TikTok, which is appreciated, TikTok keeps 70% of it, which to some people seems high. Good for them for getting it. So if you want to make a small donation, I have a $5 per month Patreon, like Eddie has one, and that supports independent content creators like me, because the reason I had to stop doing so many lives is I just had to spend more time doing work to pay the bills. I would love to do this full time. I really enjoy it. I think it works out well. It's just not, TikTok unfortunately doesn't pay much of anything. I think my last live I did, I got 13 cents. I'm not kidding you. They send you a little note saying, congratulations, you own 13. Why do they even bother? I don't even know. But I don't do it for money. I do it because I love it and I care about the cause and I care about some of these issues. And I want to share some things and bring great people on like Eddie and others. There'll be other guests, so keep your eyes and ears peeled. I always do a promotional video like I did this time. And, spread the word. Tell people about Eddie. Tell people about me. Like I said with Eddie's videos, if you watch one of my videos, if you like it, put a comment in it. All you need to do is put in 5 words. It's amazing how much it amplifies the video to more people. I'm being shadow banned out the ass. I just am. My view count has just dropped through the floor. So not to complain, it just is what it is, because any basically confident, capable pro-Palestinian communicator who's a Westerner gets crushed. Just the way it is, unfortunately. So I really appreciate everybody being here. If I didn't catch your questions, or if I'll get you next time, I'll be on Saturday from 12 noon Eastern time to 4 p.m. Every once in a while, I'll do an impromptu one if something's going on or I just want to talk about some stuff. But I'll see you all, if not before. I'll see you on Saturday at 4 p.m. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate everybody. Thanks. Have a good night.